Before the video starts, please leave a like and write any comment. Let's try to reach 1,000 comments and 2,000 likes. The channel has taken a hard hit recently, and I truly need your support. If everyone watching leaves one comment and one like, we can reach that goal together. And now, let's begin. In the dim corridor of pines, I heard ragged breathing behind me, so close I felt the terrifying warm exhalation on my neck. And I realized that if I dared to turn around, I might not survive any next moment. My name is Jonathan Pierce, and this happened back in 2013 at the Lewis and Clark National Forest in Montana. I was fresh on the job back then, a park ranger assigned to survey trails and keep campers safe. Most days I loved walking among the towering evergreens, clearing brush and making sure the posted signs stayed legible. Everyone said the place was majestic and calm. But on that morning, a volunteer named Maria called me on my handheld radio, her voice unsteady. She'd found a torn-up campsite scattered with personal belongings and no sign of the campers who'd occupied it. I told her I'd meet her at the ridge. I remember stepping onto that overgrown path and feeling something I couldn't quite explain. Not a breeze, just a quiet that pressed on me. My boots crunched the needles underfoot, and the thick canopy above turned the trail into a hallway of shadows. Now and then I paused, listening for anything unusual. The day before, I had heard rumors from hunters about strange tracks, but I brushed it off. Now I wished I'd taken them more seriously. The forest had always been my sanctuary. I'd grown up in Missoula, just a couple hours away, raised by a father who worked lumber and a mother who taught me to identify every bird by its call before I could properly spell my name. I'd spent my childhood summers camping in these mountains, and when the ranger position opened up, it felt like coming home. 3 months into the job, I thought I knew every inch of these woods, every mood of the forest. I was wrong. That morning had started like any other. I woke before dawn in my small cabin at the ranger station, made a pot of strong coffee, and reviewed the day's tasks while the pink glow of sunrise filtered through my kitchen window. The radio call from Maria interrupted my second cup. Maria wasn't technically a ranger. She was a graduate student in environmental science doing a 6-month volunteer stint with the Forest Service. Smart as hell, with a quiet competence that made her easy to work with. She'd been mapping invasive plant species along the eastern ridge when she stumbled upon the campsite. "Jonathan, I need you out here," she'd said, her voice tight with tension. "Something's not right." The trail to the eastern ridge wasn't maintained as well as the main tourist paths. It wound through a section of old-growth forest where the pines stood so dense they blotted out most of the sunlight. Locals called it the cathedral for the way the light filtered through in dusty shafts, like stained glass in an ancient church. But that day it felt more like a tomb. I carried my standard gear: radio, first aid kit, sidearm, a Glock 22 department issue, and a heavy maglite that doubled as a bludgeon in a pinch. The weight of the gun at my hip should have been reassuring, but as I hiked deeper into the cathedral, unease settled over me like a shroud. The silence was what got to me first. Forests are never truly quiet. There's always the rustle of small animals, the calls of birds, the whisper of wind through the branches. But as I approached the coordinates Maria had given me, the sounds drained away, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. When I reached her, Maria was standing next to a broken tent pole stuck in the ground at an odd angle. She looked rattled. A collapsed tent lay half buried in leaves with a sleeping bag torn open. There was a spatula in the dirt, and behind a fallen trunk I found a boot and an empty water jug. But no footprints, no immediate signs of where the people might have gone. "I already checked the permit registry," Maria said, rubbing her arms as though cold despite the warm June air. "Family of 3, Michael and Sarah Denton with their teenage son Jake. They were supposed to check out tomorrow." I bent down and traced my fingers along a jagged tear in the fabric of the tent. It looked slashed, like something powerful had ripped it from the outside. Maria pointed to a pile of branches and said she'd found scraps of clothing over there. I followed her, weaving past thick bushes and stepping over damp logs. The ground dipped in a way that made me uneasy, as if the forest itself had sunk under some weight. Between 2 rotting stumps, I spotted a piece of torn flannel smeared with dark patches that told me all I needed to know. The sight made my stomach tense. "Is that blood?" Maria asked, though she already knew the answer. I nodded grimly. "Radio it in. We need backup." Maria pulled out her radio and tried to call headquarters. Nothing but static answered her. She tried again, adjusting the frequency. Still nothing. We're in a dead zone, I said, though that was unusual. Our radios were designed to work throughout the forest. We'll have to hike back to higher ground to get a signal. What about the family? Maria asked. I studied the campsite again, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The tent was shredded, but the campfire was still neatly arranged, with a pot of what looked like beans set carefully aside. The family's backpacks were piled neatly against a tree. There were no signs of bears or other large predators. No tracks, no scat, none of the telltale marks bears leave when they raid a campsite. Something's off, I muttered. This doesn't look like an animal attack. What else could do this? Maria gestured at the torn tent. I didn't have an answer, but a chill ran down my spine as I recalled the hunters' rumors from the day before. 2 seasoned elk hunters had stopped by the ranger station just before closing, their faces unusually pale. We found tracks, one had said. A man named Peterson who'd been hunting these woods for 30 years. Like nothing I've ever seen before. I dismissed it as the overactive imagination of men who'd spent too long in the backcountry with a flask of whiskey for company. Now, I wasn't so sure. Let's check the perimeter, I said to Maria. Look for tracks, anything unusual. We split up, working in a widening circle around the campsite. The forest felt oppressive, the towering pines looming over us like silent sentinels. Every snap of a twig made me flinch. Jonathan! Maria's voice came from beyond a thicket of young pines. I found something. I hurried over to where she stood, staring down at the forest floor. The ground was disturbed, with long furrows carved into the soft dirt, as if something heavy had been dragged. Beside the drag marks were indentations that might have been footprints, but they were unlike any I'd seen before, too large for a human, with odd spacing between what looked like toes, and a strange elongated heel. What could make prints like that? Maria whispered. I shook my head slowly. I don't know. The drag marks led away from the campsite, deeper into the forest. My training told me to go back, to get help before proceeding. But the thought of that family, possibly injured and alone in the woods, overrode my caution. We need to follow these, I said. They might lead us to the Dentons. Maria hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but let's stay close. The trail of drag marks and strange footprints led us deeper into the cathedral, where the pines grew so dense that the forest floor was carpeted with centuries of fallen needles. The air grew cooler, damper, heavy with the scent of resin and decay. I unholstered my sidearm, the weight of it suddenly insufficient against the growing dread in my gut. We followed the trail for almost half an hour, deeper than I'd ever ventured into this part of the forest. The terrain grew rougher, with outcroppings of gray stone and sudden drops where the ground fell away. The tracks continued unerringly, as if whatever made them knew exactly where it was going. The trail ended at a steep slope where the ground fell off into a rocky drop. We peered over the edge and spotted a shallow stream below. The water was tinted with swirls of something dark. My pulse quickened and Maria backed away. We couldn't see any bodies, but we knew we had to get down there. The drag marks led right to the edge of the drop, as if whatever was being pulled had been taken down the slope. We need to get down there, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Maria looked at me, her face pale. Do you think they're still alive? I didn't answer. We both knew what those dark swirls in the water probably meant. As we searched for a safe way down the slope, a sound reached us from somewhere in the forest behind. A low gurgling growl that raised the hair on my arms. It didn't sound like any animal native to these woods. It sounded wrong. Maria froze, her eyes wide. What was that? I don't know, I said, my hand tightening on my gun. But let's get moving. We picked our way down the slope as quickly as we dared, using tree roots and outcroppings as handholds. The sound didn't come again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was tracking our every move through the cathedral's endless columns of pine. At the bottom of the slope, the stream ran cold and clear, except for those disturbing swirls of reddish-brown. The drag marks continued to the water's edge and then disappeared. That was when I noticed the set of prints at the water's edge, partly obscured by silt. They looked almost human but larger, with irregular spacing between the toes. It was as if whoever or whatever made them had an awkward gait. I touched the side of one print, feeling the dampness of the soil. Fresh. Made within the last few hours, Maria whispered. We should call for backup. I agreed. The radio crackled as I tried to get through to Ranger headquarters, but all I got was static. Maria's radio echoed the same. We were too deep in a recess of forest with poor reception. I told her we'd climb back up and try from higher ground. We never made it. A sudden thud in the trees made me spin around. I raised my pistol, but for a second I saw nothing. Then my eyes settled on a shape half hidden behind a slanted trunk. It had a thin, angular frame that looked wrong, as if draped in sagging skin. Bright, pale eyes blinked at me from a face that was too narrow, too elongated. My throat went dry. My instincts flared and I squeezed off one shot. The echo rang out, but the shape vanished behind the trunk. Maria cried out, stumbling backward into the stream. She scrambled up, soaking her pants and arms. I yanked her toward me. We gotta move, I said, and we rushed to the slope, clawing at branches to climb. The entire forest felt charged with tension. Something shifted behind the trees again, snapping twigs. My heart hammered. We crawled up that slope faster than I ever thought possible. We caught our breath in a stand of pines near the top. I tried the radio again. Still nothing but static. Maria's face was ashen, her hands trembling as she gripped her radio. What was that thing? She whispered. I don't know, I said, scanning the woods around us. But we need to get back to the outpost. Now, we only had about a mile and a half to cover, but the undergrowth was dense and the sun was hanging low. Shadows stretched in all directions and I couldn't shake the feeling that thing was close behind us. We moved as quickly as we dared, trying to balance speed with stealth. The forest that had once felt like home now seemed alien and hostile, full of hidden threats and watching eyes. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. Do you think it killed them? Maria asked as we paused to catch our breath behind a fallen log. The family? I didn't want to speculate, but the evidence pointed to a grim conclusion. The torn tent, the blood, the drag marks. It didn't look good. Let's focus on getting back, I said. We pressed on, picking our way through the dense undergrowth. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy in dappled patches, turning the forest floor into a shifting mosaic of light and shadow. It would be dark soon, and the thought of being in these woods after nightfall made my skin crawl. We heard movements that didn't match any animal I recognized, sharp, erratic scraping against bark. We moved quickly, weaving through brambles. I was hyper-aware of every snap and rustle. My clothes snagged on branches. My breath rasped in my throat. At one point we stumbled across a fresh gash in a pine trunk about shoulder height with wet sap oozing down. The cut looked deep, like something had raked across the bark with furious strength. It's marking its territory, I said, more to myself than to Maria. Or it's tracking us, she replied, her voice barely audible. We pushed on, faster now, less concerned with stealth than with distance. The forest grew darker as the sun dipped behind the mountains. Shadows lengthened and merged, turning the woods into a maze of black and gray. I pulled out my maglite but hesitated to turn it on. The light would make us easy to spot. A twig snapped somewhere to our left, and we both froze. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. For a long moment, there was nothing but our own ragged breathing. Then came a soft, wet sound like meat being torn from bone. Maria clutched my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin through my jacket. I raised my gun, pointing it toward the sound, though I could see nothing in the gathering darkness. The wet tearing sounds continued, punctuated by a low, gurgling growl. Whatever was making that noise was feeding. I switched on the maglite, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of a pale, elongated form hunched over something dark and wet. Then it was gone, vanishing into the underbrush with unnatural speed. We didn't wait to see what it had been feeding on. We ran, abandoning all pretense of caution. Branches whipped at our faces, roots threatened to trip us, but fear drove us forward. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the image of that pale, twisted form spurred me on. The outpost was close now. I could see the lights through the trees, a beacon of safety in the darkening forest. Maria was a few steps ahead of me, her breathing ragged and harsh. We burst from the trees into the small clearing where the outpost stood. A sturdy log structure with a generator shed out back and a radio tower rising above the roof. The lights were on, which meant someone was inside. Relief flooded through me. Almost there, I gasped to Maria. That was when we heard it. A high, keening sound that cut through the air like a knife. It wasn't a growl or a roar, but something between a scream and a wail, full of hunger and rage. It came from the trees behind us, and it was close. "Run!" I shouted, pushing Maria toward the outpost's porch. We sprinted across the clearing, the sound of our footfalls drowned out by that terrible keening. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw movement at the tree line. A pale shape, taller than a man, emerging from the shadows. Maria reached the porch first, pounding on the door. "Help! Let us in!" The door flew open, and the familiar figure of Sullivan, our head ranger, stood framed in the doorway. His eyes widened as he took in our disheveled appearance. "Inside now," he barked, ushering us in. I stumbled through the door, turning to catch one last glimpse of the clearing. The pale shape was gone, melted back into the forest. Sullivan slammed the door and shot the bolt home. "What the hell happened to you two?" he demanded, looking us up and down. His gaze lingered on my drawn gun. Maria sank into a chair, her legs giving out. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. The interior of the outpost was warm and brightly lit, the normality of it jarring after what we'd experienced in the forest. "We found a wrecked campsite," I said between breaths. "The Denton family. They're missing, probably dead." Sullivan's bushy eyebrows drew together. "Dead? What makes you say that?" I described what we'd found, the shredded tent, the blood, the drag marks leading to the stream. And then, haltingly, I told him about the creature we'd seen. Sullivan's expression shifted from concern to skepticism. "A creature? What kind of creature?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Nothing I've ever seen before. It was tall, pale, moved faster than anything I've ever tracked. And those eyes." I shuddered at the memory of those pale, unblinking eyes. "It wasn't human," Maria said, her voice steadier now. "But it wasn't an animal either. At least not any animal native to these mountains." Sullivan rubbed his grizzled chin. "Could have been a bear with mange. They can look mighty strange when they're sick." I shook my head firmly. "It wasn't a bear. The prints were all wrong, and no bear moves like that. This was something else." Sullivan didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. "Radio it in," he said. "We'll get search and rescue out here at first light." Maria tried the radio on the desk, but got nothing but static. The landline phone was dead too. "Storm must have knocked out the lines," Sullivan muttered, though the skies had been clear all day. "I'll check the generator. Make sure we've got power through the night." "Don't go out there," I said, more sharply than I intended. "That thing is still out there." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "I've been working these woods for 20 years, son. I've handled my share of problem wildlife. I'll be fine." Before I could protest further, he grabbed a shotgun from the rack by the door and headed outside. I moved to the window, watching as he made his way to the generator shed, shotgun at the ready. The clearing was dark now, the only light coming from the outpost and Sullivan's flashlight. "We should have brought backup," Maria said quietly behind me. "We shouldn't have followed those tracks." I couldn't disagree. We'd broken protocol, and now a family was missing and we were holed up in an outpost with limited communications, being stalked by something I couldn't even properly describe. Outside, Sullivan disappeared into the generator shed. I kept my eyes fixed on the doorway, waiting for him to re-emerge. A minute passed, then another. "He's been in there too long," I said, reaching for my gun. Before I could move toward the door, a piercing scream split the night. A human scream, filled with pain and terror. It came from the generator shed. "Sullivan!" I shouted, yanking open the outpost door. Maria grabbed my arm. "Don't go out there." I hesitated, torn between the duty to help my colleague and the primal fear coursing through my veins. The scream came again, cut off abruptly this time. "Stay here," I told Maria. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Sullivan." Before she could protest, I was out the door and running toward the generator shed, gun drawn. The night air was cold against my face, the sound of my boots on the gravel path unnaturally loud in the silence. The shed door hung open, a rectangle of deeper darkness against the night. "Sullivan?" I called, approaching cautiously. There was no answer. I reached the doorway and shone my mag light inside. The beam illuminated the generator, still humming away, and next to it a smear of dark liquid on the concrete floor. Sullivan's shotgun lay abandoned beside the smear. My heart pounding in my throat, I swept the light around the small shed. There was no sign of Sullivan, but the back wall had been torn open, wood splintered outward as if something had burst through from inside. A rustle in the darkness beyond the hole made me swing my light toward the sound. For a brief moment, the beam caught a pair of pale, reflective eyes staring back at me. Then they were gone. I backed out of the shed, keeping my gun trained on the hole in the wall. Whatever had taken Sullivan was out there in the darkness, watching and waiting. I sprinted back to the outpost, my mind racing. Sullivan was gone, taken by that thing just as the Denton family had been. And now it was just Maria and me, trapped in a remote outpost with limited communications and an unknown predator circling outside. Maria let me in, her face tight with fear. "Sullivan?" I shook my head grimly. "It got him, tore right through the back wall of the shed." Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God." I secured the door, checking that all the windows were locked. The outpost wasn't built as a fortress. It was a way station for rangers, not a defensive position. The walls were solid logs, but the windows were standard glass, and the door was sturdy but not impenetrable. "We need to call for help," Maria said, trying the radio again. Nothing but static answered her. I checked my watch. It was just past 9 p.m. The night shift wouldn't be expecting a check-in until midnight, and when we didn't report in, they might just assume we were out of radio range. It could be morning before anyone realized something was wrong. "We need to hold out until dawn," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Then we make a run for the main ranger station." Maria nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. The main station was 5 miles away. 5 miles of dense forest where that thing was hunting. I took stock of our weapons. I had my Glock with 2 full magazines, 34 rounds total. There was a rifle in the gun safe, a Remington 700, with maybe 20 rounds of ammunition. Not much to hold off a determined predator, especially one that moved as fast as what we'd seen in the forest. "What is that thing?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I don't know, but it's smart. It took out the generator first, cut our communications. How does it know to do that?" That was the question that had been nagging at me. The creature's behavior wasn't that of a simple predator. It showed cunning, planning. It had isolated us methodically, cutting off our escape routes and communications. Before I could formulate an answer, a sound came from outside, a soft scratching at the outpost wall. Maria's eyes widened, and I raised a finger to my lips, moving silently to the window. Peering through the glass, I could see nothing but darkness. The scratching continued, moving along the wall toward the back of the outpost. Then came another sound, a low guttural vocalization that raised the hair on the back of my neck. It wasn't a growl or a roar, but something almost like speech, though no language I'd ever heard. "It's testing the defenses," I whispered to Maria. Looking for a way in. The scratching moved to one of the rear windows, followed by a sharp rap against the glass. It was toying with us, letting us know it was there. I moved to the gun safe, dialing in the combination with shaking fingers. The Remington was there, along with boxes of ammunition. I loaded the rifle, the familiar actions calming my racing heart somewhat. The scratching stopped abruptly, and for a moment the outpost was silent except for our breathing. Then came a tremendous crash as something heavy slammed against the door. The wood creaked but held. Maria let out a startled cry, backing away from the door. I raised the rifle, aiming at the entrance. Another crash, and the door frame splintered slightly. One more hit like that, and it would give way. "The back room," I hissed to Maria. "Go!" The outpost had a small back room used for storage. It had a single small window, but the door was solid. It wasn't much, but it would give us another barrier if the creature broke through the front door. Maria hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll hold it off." "Go." She darted into the back room as another crash hit the front door. This time the wood split visibly. a jagged crack running from top to bottom. I steadied the rifle against my shoulder, sighting down the barrel at the weakening door. My palms were slick with sweat, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The next crash brought the door halfway off its hinges, revealing a glimpse of the night beyond and a tall, pale shape silhouetted against the darkness. I fired, the rifle's report deafening in the confined space of the outpost. The shape jerked back, a high, keening wail cutting through the night. But it didn't fall. Instead, it seemed to gather itself, and then with a final, powerful blow, the door gave way entirely. The creature stood framed in the doorway, and for the first time I got a clear look at it. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with a gaunt, elongated body. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over a frame that seemed both emaciated and powerful. Its face was the worst part, a narrow, pointed visage with sunken cheeks and a lipless mouth that revealed rows of needle-like teeth. And those eyes, large and pale, reflected the light like a nocturnal animal's. It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely animal either. It stood upright on 2 legs, its arms unnaturally long and ending in hands with elongated fingers tipped with black claws. It wore no clothing, but patches of what looked like dark hair or fur covered parts of its body. For a moment, we stared at each other, predator and prey locked in a frozen tableau. Then it tilted its head, studying me with those terrible eyes, and made that guttural speech-like sound again. I fired a second shot, aiming for its chest. The bullet hit, and dark fluid splattered from the wound, but the creature barely flinched. It took a step forward, into the outpost, its movements jerky and uncoordinated, as if it wasn't fully accustomed to its own body. I backed away, firing again and again. The bullets hit, tearing chunks from the creature's pale flesh, but it kept coming, its mouth opening in a silent scream that revealed row upon row of those needle teeth. The rifle clicked empty just as my back hit the wall. The creature was less than 10 feet away now, its breath a fetid cloud in the air between us. I dropped the rifle and drew my Glock, firing point blank into the thing's face. The bullet tore through its cheek, revealing a glimpse of bone and gristle beneath, but still it advanced. One long-fingered hand reached for me, claws extended. I ducked under its arm, rolling away and coming up behind it. The creature was fast, but its movements were strangely awkward, as if it was fighting against its own body's limitations. It whirled around, those pale eyes fixing on me again. I emptied the Glock into its torso, the bullets punching through its emaciated frame. Dark fluid, not quite blood, too thick and viscous, poured from the wounds, but the creature kept coming. "The back room!" I shouted to Maria, backing toward the storage room door. "Now!" I heard her fumbling with the lock, and then the door swung open. I backed through it, still facing the creature, which had paused to pull a splinter of wood from its arm, a fragment of the door it had destroyed. As soon as I was through, Maria slammed the door shut and turned the lock. There was a heavy filing cabinet against one wall, and together we shoved it in front of the door, barricading ourselves in. The creature hit the door a moment later, the wood shuddering under the impact. The filing cabinet slid back an inch, metal screeching against the floor. "It won't hold," Maria gasped, her face pale in the dim light of the storage room's single bulb. She was right. The door was already cracking, the creature's claws visible through the widening gaps as it tore at the wood. The filing cabinet slid another inch with each impact. I reloaded the Glock with my last magazine, knowing it wouldn't be enough. The creature was wounded, leaking that dark fluid from multiple bullet holes, but it showed no signs of slowing down. My eyes darted around the storage room, searching for anything we could use as a weapon or an escape route. The single window was small, but maybe big enough for Maria to squeeze through. "The window?" I said, gesturing with the gun. "You go first, I'll hold it off." Maria shook her head stubbornly. "I'm not leaving you. One of us needs to get help," I insisted. "You're smaller, you can fit through that window. I'll keep it busy." The door splintered further, a long, pale arm with too many joints reaching through the gap. Maria looked at the window, then back at me, her expression torn. "Go," I shouted. As the filing cabinet slid another few inches, she moved to the window, trying to force it open. It was stuck, probably hadn't been opened in years. I kept my gun trained on the door as Maria struggled with the window. "It's jammed," she hissed. I glanced around again, desperate now. There had to be something we could use. The storage room held supplies, maps, uniforms, equipment for trail maintenance. My eyes fell on a red canister in the corner, a fire extinguisher. "Here," I said, grabbing it and thrusting it into Maria's hands. "Use this to break the window." She took it, hefting its weight, and then swung it at the window with all her strength. The glass shattered outward, leaving a jagged opening to the night beyond. "Now go," I said. "Run for the main station, don't stop for anything." Maria hesitated, then nodded. She handed me the fire extinguisher, our fingers brushing in the exchange. "Be careful, Jonathan." She turned to the window, preparing to climb through. That was when the door gave way entirely, the filing cabinet toppling forward with a crash. The creature stood in the doorway, its pale form silhouetted against the light from the main room. It let out that high, keening wail and lunged toward us. I raised the Glock and fired, the bullets tearing into the creature's already wounded body. It staggered but kept coming. I fired again and again, until the gun clicked empty. The creature was almost upon us now, its clawed hands reaching for Maria as she scrambled through the broken window. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the fire extinguisher and swung it with all my might at the creature's head. The metal canister connected with a sickening crunch, and the creature reeled back, dark fluid spraying from a new wound on its temple. I didn't waste the opportunity. I aimed the nozzle of the extinguisher at the creature's face and squeezed the trigger. A cloud of white chemical foam enveloped the creature's head, and it let out a shriek of pain or surprise. It clawed at its face, trying to clear the foam from its eyes, giving me precious seconds to act. I turned to the window. Maria was through, her face appearing on the other side. "Run!" I shouted. "Go!" She disappeared into the darkness, and I turned back to face the creature, which was still disoriented but recovering quickly. I swung the extinguisher again, catching it in the chest. It stumbled back, giving me the opening I needed. I lunged for the window, forcing my larger frame through the jagged opening. Glass cut into my sides, but adrenaline dulled the pain. I was halfway through when I felt claws dig into my leg, tearing through denim and flesh alike. I cried out, kicking back wildly with my free leg. My boot connected with something solid, and the grip on my leg loosened enough for me to pull free. I tumbled to the ground outside, scrambling to my feet as the creature's pale face appeared at the broken window. Maria was already running across the clearing toward the tree line. I followed, ignoring the burning pain in my leg. Behind me, I heard glass breaking further as the creature forced its larger body through the window. We reached the trees just as the creature freed itself from the outpost. Its keening wail followed us into the forest, a sound of rage and hunger that spurred us to greater speed. The forest was dark, the only light coming from the stars and a sliver of moon overhead. We ran blindly, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. But fear was a powerful motivator, and we kept moving, putting distance between ourselves and the creature. I had no idea if we were heading in the right direction. The main ranger station was east of the outpost, but in the darkness and panic, I'd lost all sense of direction. We could be running deeper into the wilderness, away from help. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Maria slowed, gasping for breath. "I can't keep going," she panted. I slowed too, my leg throbbing where the creature's claws had torn the flesh. I could feel blood soaking my jeans, warm and sticky. "We need to hide," I said, scanning the dark forest around us. "It's tracking us by sound and scent. We need to find somewhere to hole up until dawn." Maria nodded, too winded to speak. I led her through the trees, searching for any kind of shelter. The forest floor was mostly open beneath the pines, offering little in the way of hiding places. We needed something more substantial. After a few minutes of cautious movement, we came upon a fallen tree, its massive trunk creating a natural barrier. The root ball had been torn from the ground when it fell, creating a hollow space beneath. "Here," I whispered, leading Maria to the hollow. It was tight, but we both managed to squeeze in, pulling dead branches across the opening to obscure it further. We huddled together in the darkness, listening. For a long time, there was nothing but the normal sounds of the forest at night, the rustle of leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl. Then came a sound that made my blood run cold, that soft, guttural vocalization, not quite speech but too complex to be a simple animal call. It was distant, but it was coming closer. The creature was tracking us methodically, quartering the forest in search of its prey. Maria pressed closer to me, her body trembling. I put an arm around her, as much for my own comfort as hers. We sat in silence, barely daring to breathe as the sounds of the creature's search grew closer. A twig snapped nearby, and we froze. The vocalization came again, so close now that it seemed to be right outside our hiding place. I could hear the creature moving, its footsteps almost silent on the forest floor. It passed directly in front of our hollow, and through the screen of branches I caught a glimpse of those pale, elongated legs. It paused, as if sensing our presence, and for a heart-stopping moment I thought it would discover us. Then, slowly, it moved on, continuing its methodical search pattern. We remained motionless, hardly daring to believe our luck. Minutes ticked by, and gradually the sounds of the creature faded into the distance. "What do we do now?" Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. "We wait for dawn," I replied. "Then we make for the main station." It was going to be a long night. The hours crawled by, each minute stretching into what felt like an eternity. We remained huddled in our hiding place, listening to the forest and the occasional distant sounds of the creature as it continued its hunt. My leg throbbed where the creature's claws had torn into the flesh, and I could feel the sticky warmth of blood soaking through my jeans. Maria noticed my discomfort. "You're hurt," she whispered. I nodded grimly. "It got me when I was coming through the window. It's not too deep, but it needs cleaning." She tore a strip from the bottom of her shirt and carefully wrapped it around my calf, tying it tight to stem the bleeding. Her hands were gentle but firm, practiced in first aid like all Forest Service personnel. "Thanks," I murmured, shifting to find a more comfortable position in our cramped hiding place. "What was that thing?" Maria asked, her voice barely audible. I shook my head. "I don't know. It's not like any animal I've ever seen. The way it moves, the way it thinks. It's almost like what?" I hesitated, reluctant to voice the thought that had been forming in my mind. "Like it's not from here." "What do you mean, like not from Montana?" "Not from anywhere," I said. "At least nowhere we know about." Maria was silent for a long moment. "You think it's some kind of undiscovered species?" "Maybe." The word felt inadequate. The creature's behavior was too deliberate, too intelligent for a simple undiscovered predator. The way it had disabled the generator, the way it had tested the outpost's defenses before attacking, these were the actions of something with reasoning capacity. "Whatever it is," I continued, "it's smart, and it's hunting us specifically." "Why?" Maria whispered. "Why us?" I had no answer for that. We lapsed into silence again, each lost in our own thoughts as we waited for dawn. I must have dozed off despite the danger, because the next thing I knew, Maria was shaking me gently. "Jonathan, the sun's coming up." I blinked, disoriented for a moment. Pale light filtered through the branches covering our hiding place, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Dawn had arrived. "We need to move," I said, wincing as I shifted my injured leg. The bleeding had stopped, but the wound was stiff and painful. Maria helped me out of the hollow, both of us scanning the forest warily for any sign of the creature. The woods seemed peaceful in the early morning light, birds singing in the branches overhead. It was hard to believe that somewhere among these same trees lurked the horror we'd encountered the night before. "Which way to the main station?" Maria asked. I oriented myself, using the rising sun as a guide. "East, that way." I pointed through the trees. "About 4 miles, maybe 5. Maria nodded, her face set with determination. "Can you walk?" I tested my leg, putting weight on it cautiously. Pain shot up from the wound, but it held. "I'll manage." We set off through the forest, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. The morning air was cool and damp, mist rising from the ground in wispy tendrils. Under different circumstances, it would have been a beautiful hike. Every few minutes we stopped to listen, alert for any sound that might indicate the creature was nearby. But the forest remained peaceful, filled only with the normal sounds of morning. "Do you think it's gone?" Maria asked after we'd been walking for about an hour. "I doubt it," I replied. "More likely it's resting." Many predators are less active during daylight hours, but it's not a normal predator, she pointed out. She was right. We couldn't assume the creature would behave like a mountain lion or a bear. Its hunting patterns seemed unique, tailored to its strange physiology and intelligence. We continued on, the terrain growing steeper as we approached a ridge that separated us from the main ranger station. My leg was throbbing constantly now, and I found myself leaning on Maria more and more as we climbed. We should take a break, she suggested as we reached a small clearing near the top of the ridge. I nodded gratefully, sinking down onto a fallen log. Maria sat beside me, her eyes scanning the forest around us. We're making good time, I said, trying to sound encouraging. Another hour or two and we should reach the station. Maria didn't respond immediately. She was staring at something on the ground a few feet away. Jonathan, she said quietly. Look, I followed her gaze and felt my blood run cold. There, pressed into a patch of damp earth, was one of those strange, elongated footprints we'd seen at the campsite. It came this way, Maria whispered. I scanned the clearing more carefully, noticing now that there were several of the prints, forming a trail that led up the ridge, the same direction we were headed. It's going to the station, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Why would it do that? Maria's voice was tense with fear. I shook my head. I don't know. But we need to warn them. We set off again with renewed urgency, following the ridgeline toward the main station. The creature's tracks were clear now that we knew what to look for. Those strange, elongated prints with the odd spacing between the toes. They led straight up the ridge and then down the other side, heading unerringly toward the ranger station. The pain in my leg seemed less important now, dulled by the urgency of our mission. We had to reach the station before the creature, had to warn our colleagues of the danger. As we crested the ridge, we could see the station in the distance, a cluster of log buildings nestled in a clearing about 2 miles away. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main building, a sign that the morning shift was already up and about. We need to hurry, I said, starting down the slope. The descent was treacherous, the ground still damp from morning dew. We slipped and stumbled, grabbing at branches to steady ourselves. Every minute felt crucial now, every delay potentially fatal for our colleagues at the station. We were about halfway down when Maria suddenly froze, grabbing my arm. Listen, she hissed. I stopped, straining my ears. At first I heard nothing unusual, just the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Then came a sound that made my skin crawl. That same guttural, almost speech that the creature had made. It was close, too close, and coming from somewhere ahead of us. It's between us and the station, Maria whispered, her fingers digging into my arm. I nodded grimly, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. We need to circle around, I said. Come on. We altered our course, moving laterally across the slope rather than directly down. The going was even rougher here, the ground steeper and covered with loose rocks that threatened to give way under our feet. We'd gone perhaps 100 yards when a scream echoed through the forest, a human scream, coming from the direction of the ranger station. No, I breathed, my heart sinking. We were too late. Maria's face had gone pale. We have to help them. I nodded, though I knew we were in no condition to confront the creature again. My gun was empty, my leg injured. Maria was unarmed and exhausted. But our colleagues were in danger and we couldn't abandon them. We changed direction again, heading straight for the station now, caution giving way to desperate urgency. Another scream reached us, cut off abruptly in a way that made my stomach clench. As we neared the clearing where the station stood, we slowed, approaching more cautiously. The main building was visible through the trees, its log walls solid and reassuring. But the scene around it was one of chaos. 2 Forest Service trucks were parked haphazardly in front of the building, their doors hanging open. Equipment was scattered across the ground as if dropped in haste. And there on the steps of the main building was a dark stain that could only be blood. Where is everyone? Maria whispered. I shook my head, scanning the clearing for any sign of movement. The place seemed deserted, though there should have been at least 4 rangers on the morning shift. Stay close, I murmured, leading the way toward the main building. We crossed the clearing quickly, alert for any sound or movement. The door of the main building stood ajar, a bad sign. Rangers were meticulous about securing the station, especially when predators were in the area. I pushed the door open slowly, wincing at the creak of the hinges. The interior was dim after the brightness outside, and it took a moment for my eyes to adjust. What I saw made my blood run cold. The main room of the station was in disarray, furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor, and there, slumped against the far wall, was a body. Ranger Peterson, the man who'd told me about the strange tracks just the day before. His throat had been torn open, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Maria made a small, choked sound behind me. I held up a hand, signaling for silence. The creature could still be inside. We moved further into the room, every sense alert for danger. The station was eerily quiet, the only sound our own breathing and the soft creak of floorboards beneath our feet. The door to the communications room was open, revealing another body, young Ranger Collins, sprawled across the radio equipment, his back a mass of deep parallel gashes. The radio itself was destroyed, smashed beyond repair. "It's cutting off communications," I whispered. "Just like at the outpost." Maria nodded, her face pale with shock. "Why? What does it want?" Before I could answer, a sound came from the back of the building. A soft thud, followed by the creak of a door. We froze, listening intently. Then came that guttural vocalization, closer now, coming from the hallway that led to the sleeping quarters. The creature was still here. I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything we could use to defend ourselves. My eyes fell on a fire axe mounted on the wall. I grabbed it, the weight solid and reassuring in my hands. "The trucks," I whispered to Maria. "The keys should be in the ignition. If we can get to one of them." She nodded, understanding immediately. Our only hope was to escape, to get to the nearest town and bring back help. We backed toward the front door, moving as silently as possible. The vocalization came again, louder now, followed by the sound of movement in the hallway. We reached the door, and I pushed Maria through first, following right behind her. Outside, we sprinted for the nearest truck, adrenaline momentarily overriding the pain in my leg. Maria reached the driver's side door first, yanking it open. I circled around to the passenger side, keeping the axe raised and ready. "The keys are here," Maria called, sliding into the driver's seat. "Get in." I was about to do so when a movement at the station door caught my eye. The creature stood there, its pale, elongated form stark against the dark interior of the building. Those terrible eyes fixed on us, and it let out that high, keening wail that had haunted my dreams the night before. "Go!" I shouted to Maria. "Start the truck!" The engine roared to life as the creature bounded across the clearing toward us, moving with that unnatural speed that defied its awkward physiology. I swung the axe as it reached me, catching it in the shoulder. Dark fluid sprayed from the wound, but the creature barely slowed, its clawed hand lashing out and catching me across the chest. The impact sent me sprawling, the axe flying from my grip. The creature loomed over me, those needle teeth bared in a grimace of rage or hunger. The truck's engine revved behind me, and then Maria was there, the vehicle screeching to a halt just feet away. "Jonathan!" she screamed. "Get in!" I rolled to the side as the creature lunged, its claws tearing into the earth where I had been a moment before. I scrambled to my feet, diving for the passenger door that Maria had flung open. The creature was right behind me, its clawed hand catching the back of my jacket. I felt myself being yanked backward, the fabric tearing under the creature's grip. Then there was the deafening report of a gunshot, and the creature reeled back, dark fluid spurting from a wound in its chest. I looked up to see Sullivan standing at the edge of the clearing, a rifle raised to his shoulder. Sullivan, who I'd thought was dead, taken by the creature at the outpost. He was alive, though his clothing was torn and bloody, his face pale with shock or pain. "Get in the truck," he shouted, firing again at the creature. I didn't need to be told twice. I lunged for the passenger door, pulling myself inside as Maria gunned the engine. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel as we accelerated toward Sullivan. "Come on," I shouted to him, reaching out through the window. Sullivan fired one more shot, then ran toward the truck, keeping the rifle trained on the creature, which was now moving erratically, wounded but far from defeated. As we reached Sullivan, he tossed the rifle to me through the window, then grabbed the side of the truck, swinging himself into the bed with a grunt of pain. Go, he shouted. Get us out of here. Maria floored the accelerator, and the truck shot forward, bouncing over the uneven ground as we raced for the forest road that would take us to civilization. In the rearview mirror, I could see the creature standing in the clearing watching us go. It made no attempt to follow, as if it knew it couldn't match the speed of the vehicle. As the ranger station disappeared behind us, I turned to Sullivan, who was crouched in the bed of the truck, his face grim. "We thought you were dead," I said. "The creature took you from the generator shed." Sullivan nodded, wincing as the truck hit a pothole. "It did, dragged me into the forest, but I played dead, and when it was distracted by something else, I managed to get away." "How did you end up at the main station?" Maria asked, keeping her eyes on the rough road ahead. "I circled around, trying to avoid that thing. Figured the main station was our best bet for help." Sullivan's voice was tight with pain. "Got there this morning just as it was attacking. Couldn't save the others, but I managed to get to the weapons locker. I checked the rifle he'd given me. It was a Remington, similar to the one at the outpost, with a half-full magazine. Not much, but better than nothing if the creature decided to pursue us." "What is that thing?" Maria asked, voicing the question that had been haunting us since we'd first encountered the creature. Sullivan was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice so low I almost didn't hear it over the engine, he said, "I don't think it's from here." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly what he meant. Sullivan met my eyes, his expression grim. "I mean, I don't think it's from Earth." The truck bounced along the forest road, every jolt sending a stab of pain through my injured leg. Maria's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the winding path ahead. Sullivan crouched in the truck bed, rifle at the ready, scanning the trees that flashed by on either side. "Not from Earth?" I repeated, trying to process Sullivan's words. "You think it's an alien?" Sullivan's weathered face was deadly serious. "I don't know what else to call it. You saw that thing. The way it moves, the way it thinks. It's not like anything that evolved on this planet." I wanted to argue, to dismiss the idea as ridiculous. But the image of the creature's elongated form, those pale, unblinking eyes, the almost speech that emanated from its lipless mouth, none of it fit with any known terrestrial species. "If it is not from here," Maria said carefully, "how did it get to the Lewis and Clark forest?" Sullivan shook his head. "I've been asking myself that same question. 2 weeks ago, some of the locals reported seeing strange lights in the sky over the northeastern sector. Thought it was just the usual UFO nonsense. But then we started finding those weird tracks, and animals turned up dead in ways that didn't match any predator I know. And now the Denton family," I added grimly. "And Peterson, Collins, and the others at the station," Sullivan said, his voice tight with anger or grief. "Whatever this thing is, it's hunting us, systematically." The road curved sharply, and Maria slowed the truck to navigate the bend. Through the trees ahead, I could see the glint of sunlight on metal, the main highway that would take us to the nearest town, Whitefish, about 20 miles to the west. "We need to alert the authorities," I said. "Get a team out here to track this thing down before it kills anyone else." Sullivan gave a harsh laugh. "And tell them what? That there's an alien loose in the national forest? They'll think we're crazy." "We have evidence," Maria pointed out. "The bodies at the station, the destroyed campsite, our injuries. And there were at least 3 witnesses, the 3 of us." Sullivan was silent for a moment, considering. "Maybe," he conceded. "But we need to be careful about how we present this. If we go in talking about aliens, they'll write us off before we can show them the evidence." The truck reached the highway, and Maria turned west toward Whitefish. The smooth asphalt was a relief after the rough forest road, and we picked up speed, putting more distance between us and the creature. As the miles rolled by, the adrenaline that had kept me going began to ebb, and the pain in my leg and chest where the creature had struck me intensified. I leaned back against the seat, suddenly exhausted. The events of the past 24 hours seemed almost dreamlike in their horror, too terrible to be real. "What's the plan when we reach town?" Maria asked, breaking the silence. "Sheriff's office first," Sullivan said. "They'll have the resources to coordinate with state police, maybe even the FBI if necessary." I nodded in agreement. "We'll need to guide them back to the ranger station, show them what happened, and then a search party for the Denton family, though." I trailed off, not wanting to voice the near certainty that the family was beyond help. "We should also get medical attention," Maria added, glancing at my blood-soaked jeans. "That leg needs proper treatment." We lapsed into silence again, each lost in our own thoughts as the truck ate up the miles to Whitefish. The forest gradually gave way to scattered farmland, then to the outskirts of the small mountain town. Normal life, houses, shops, people going about their daily business, unaware of the horror that lurked in the forest just miles away. Maria pulled the truck into the parking lot of the Whitefish Sheriff's Station, a sturdy brick building in the center of town. Sullivan jumped down from the truck bed, wincing as his feet hit the pavement. I eased myself out of the passenger seat, my injured leg nearly buckling under my weight. "Let's do this," Sullivan said, leading the way to the station entrance. Inside the station was quiet and mundane. A front desk with a deputy typing at a computer, wanted posters on a bulletin board, the smell of old coffee in the air. The normalcy of it was jarring after what we'd been through. The deputy looked up as we entered, his eyes widening at our disheveled appearance. "Can I help you folks?" he asked, already reaching for his radio. Sullivan stepped forward. "We need to speak with Sheriff Donahue. There's been an incident at the Lewis and Clark Ranger Station. Multiple fatalities." The deputy's expression shifted from surprise to alert professionalism. "I'll get him right away. Please have a seat." We sank into the plastic chairs in the waiting area as the deputy disappeared through a door behind the desk. A moment later, he returned with an older man in a sheriff's uniform, Donahue, a veteran lawman with a reputation for no-nonsense competence. "Sullivan," the sheriff nodded, recognizing the head ranger. "What's this about fatalities at the ranger station?" Sullivan stood, his face grim. "We need to talk in private, Jim. It's complicated." The sheriff studied our faces, noting the blood, the torn clothing, the haunted look in our eyes. He nodded once. "My office, and I'll call Doc Mercer to look at those injuries." We followed him through the station to a small, cluttered office. The sheriff closed the door behind us and gestured to chairs. "Now tell me what happened." For the next hour, we took turns relating the events of the past day, the destroyed campsite, the strange tracks, the creature in the forest, the attack on the outpost, and finally the massacre at the main ranger station. We were careful in our description of the creature, emphasizing its unusual appearance and behavior without speculating on its origins. Sheriff Donahue listened in silence, his weathered face giving away nothing. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Let me see if I understand," he said slowly. "You're telling me there's some kind of unknown predator loose in the national forest. It's killed at least 6 people that you know of, possibly more, including the Denton family and 4 rangers at the main station. And this creature is intelligent enough to deliberately disable communications and plan its attacks." "That's right," Sullivan confirmed. The sheriff's eyes moved from Sullivan to Maria to me, assessing. "And none of you got a clear enough look at this thing to identify it as a known species?" "It's not a known species," I said firmly. "Nothing that exists in these mountains could do what this thing did." Sheriff Donahue was silent for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. "I'm calling in the state police and the Fish and Wildlife Service. If there's a dangerous predator out there, we need to contain it before anyone else gets hurt." "It's more than just dangerous," Maria said quietly. "It's hunting us, specifically." The sheriff paused, his hand on the phone. "What do you mean?" "It's targeting humans," Sullivan explained. "Deliberately. This isn't a bear or a mountain lion attacking opportunistically. This thing is seeking out humans, disabling their means of communication or escape, and then killing them systematically." A shadow crossed the sheriff's face. "All the more reason to get a team out there now." He made the call, briefly explaining the situation to someone on the other end before hanging up. "They'll be here within the hour. In the meantime, Doc Mercer is on his way to look at those injuries." True to his word, a gray-haired man with a medical bag arrived a few minutes later. He cleaned and bandaged my leg wound and examined Sullivan's injuries, deep lacerations across his back where the creature had grabbed him. "You both need a hospital," the doctor said grimly. "These wounds are at high risk for infection." Later, Sullivan said, "We need to guide the team back to the ranger station first." The doctor looked like he wanted to argue but merely shook his head and continued his work. As he finished bandaging Sullivan's back, the office door opened and a state police officer in uniform entered. followed by a woman in civilian clothes with a Fish and Wildlife Service badge clipped to her belt. "Sheriff Donahue," the officer nodded. "I'm Lieutenant Clark, State Police. This is Agent Reyes from Fish and Wildlife. We understand there's been an incident in the National Forest." The sheriff gestured to us. "These three witnessed it. They can brief you on the details." We went through the story again, this time with Lieutenant Clark asking pointed questions about the creature's appearance, behavior, and the locations of the attacks. Agent Reyes took notes, her expression growing more troubled as our account progressed. "And you're certain it wasn't a bear or a mountain lion?" she asked when we finished. "Absolutely certain," Sullivan said firmly. "I've worked these woods for 20 years. I know every predator in these mountains. This was something else entirely." Agent Reyes exchanged a look with Lieutenant Clark. "We've had reports of unusual wildlife activity in the region over the past few weeks," she admitted. "But nothing like this." "We need to get out there," Lieutenant Clark said decisively. "Secure the ranger station, recover the bodies, and organize a search for this creature. And the Denton family, if there's any chance they're still alive." "I'll coordinate with county resources," Sheriff Donahue said. "We can have a full team assembled within 2 hours." "We're going with you," Sullivan stated. Not a question, but a declaration. Lieutenant Clark looked like he wanted to object, but after studying Sullivan's determined expression, he nodded. "We could use guides who know the area and have seen this creature, but you'll follow orders and stay back when we tell you to?" "Understood." We all nodded in agreement. 2 hours later, we were headed back into the forest as part of a convoy. 3 state police vehicles, 2 Fish and Wildlife trucks, an ambulance, and the sheriff's SUV. Sullivan, Maria, and I rode with Lieutenant Clark, directing him toward the main ranger station. The afternoon sun filtered through the pines as we drove up the forest road, the convoy raising a cloud of dust behind us. The forest looked peaceful, benign, giving no hint of the horror that lurked within its depths. We reached the main ranger station just after 3 p.m. The clearing was as we had left it. The abandoned vehicles, the equipment scattered across the ground, the ominous dark stain on the steps. But now, in the clear light of day, with armed officers surrounding us, the scene seemed less terrifying, more like a crime scene to be processed and understood. Lieutenant Clark organized his team efficiently. One group was sent to secure the station building and recover the bodies inside. Another began a systematic search of the perimeter, looking for tracks or other evidence. Agent Reyes coordinated with Fish and Wildlife personnel to set up trail cameras and tracking equipment. Sullivan, Maria, and I were kept in one of the vehicles, answering questions and providing details as needed. The adrenaline that had kept us going was fading now, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and the delayed shock of what we'd experienced. As the afternoon wore on, reports began coming in from the teams. 4 bodies had been recovered from the station, all rangers who had been on the morning shift. The cause of death in each case was consistent with our description. Massive trauma inflicted by something with extraordinary strength and sharp claws. The tracking team had found footprints matching our description of the creature's tracks, leading away from the station into the northeastern sector of the forest. And most disturbing of all, they had discovered what appeared to be a den or lair in a cave system about 3 miles from the station. A space filled with bones, torn clothing, and other grim evidence of the creature's feeding habits. We found 3 sets of smaller human remains in the cave, Agent Reyes reported grimly. Preliminary assessment suggests they match the description of the Denton family. I closed my eyes, a wave of grief and guilt washing over me. We had been too late to save them, too slow to recognize the threat that had entered our forest. "What about the creature itself?" Sullivan asked. "Any sign of it?" Agent Reyes shook her head. "Nothing current. The tracks lead into a particularly dense section of forest where we're having trouble following them. We've set up a perimeter and called in specialized tracking units, but it will take time to locate it." Night was falling by the time the initial investigation was complete. Lieutenant Clark decided to establish a base of operations at the ranger station, with armed teams maintaining a security perimeter through the night. Sullivan, Maria, and I were finally persuaded to return to Whitefish for proper medical treatment, with a promise that we would be kept informed of any developments. The ride back to town was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The hospital was bright and sterile, a jarring contrast to the primal terror of the forest. Doctors cleaned and sutured our wounds, administered antibiotics, and recommended admission for observation. Sullivan and I reluctantly agreed, while Maria, whose injuries were less severe, was released with instructions to return the next day. That night, lying in the hospital bed, I couldn't sleep despite the exhaustion that weighed on me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature's pale, elongated form, those unblinking eyes, that lipless mouth with its rows of needle teeth. And I heard that sound it made, that almost speech that seemed to contain meaning just beyond comprehension. Sullivan's words echoed in my mind. I don't think it's from Earth. Could it be true? Had something from beyond our world found its way to the Lewis and Clark National Forest? The idea seemed absurd, the stuff of science fiction, and yet nothing else explained what we had seen, what we had experienced. I must have dozed off eventually because I was awakened by a nurse entering my room with breakfast. As I picked at the bland hospital food, Lieutenant Clark arrived, his face grim. "We lost 2 officers last night," he said without preamble. "They were on perimeter duty. Something pulled them into the woods. We found the bodies this morning. About a mile from the station." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "The creature?" Clark nodded. "Matches your description. We've called in additional resources, state police tactical units, federal wildlife experts. Even the National Guard is on standby." "It won't be enough," I said quietly. "Not against this thing." Clark's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain my growing certainty that we were dealing with something beyond our understanding. "It's smart," I said finally. "It adapts. And it's not afraid of humans or our weapons. In fact, it seems to be targeting those it perceives as the greatest threat." Clark was silent for a moment, studying my face. "Sullivan said something similar. He thinks this creature is not natural to this area." I met his gaze steadily. "He's right. Whatever this thing is, it doesn't belong here." Clark ran a hand through his short hair, a gesture of frustration or concern. "The official theory is that we're dealing with an unknown species, possibly a previously undocumented predator that's migrated into the area. And unofficially?" A shadow crossed Clark's face. "Unofficially, some of the team are saying things that would get them laughed out of the department if they went on record, especially after they saw that cave." "What about the cave?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. Clark hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "There was something in there besides the remains, some kind of material embedded in the rock wall, not natural, metallic, but like nothing any of us had seen before, scorched, as if it had been subjected to extreme heat." The implications were clear, though neither of us wanted to voice them. If Sullivan was right, if the creature truly was not of this earth, then that material could be the remnants of however it had arrived here. "What happens now?" I asked. "We continue the hunt," Clark said firmly. "Whatever this thing is, it's killed at least 9 people that we know of. It needs to be stopped." I was discharged from the hospital that afternoon, against medical advice but with a supply of antibiotics and strict instructions to rest. Sullivan had already checked himself out and was back at the ranger station, coordinating with the search teams. Maria met me in the hospital lobby, her face drawn with lack of sleep. "They found something," she said without preamble. "In the northeastern sector. Some kind of structure. Not natural." My heart rate quickened. "Show me." We drove back to the forest in a borrowed Fish and Wildlife vehicle, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the road. The ranger station was a hive of activity when we arrived, vehicles coming and going, armed personnel establishing defensive positions, a command center set up in what had been the mess hall. Sullivan met us at the perimeter, his face haggard but his eyes alert. "They're organizing a team to investigate the structure," he said. "I've been invited to join them. So have you two if you're up for it." "What kind of structure?" I asked. Sullivan shook his head. "They're being tight-lipped about the details. But from what I've gathered, it's some kind of constructed shelter hidden deep in the most inaccessible part of the forest. Not the work of any human." The implication sent a chill through me. The creature's home, maybe? Or maybe how it got here. Sullivan's eyes met mine, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. If the creature truly was from somewhere else, that structure could be its means of arrival. "When do we leave?" Maria asked. "Now," Sullivan replied. "The team is assembling." The investigation team consisted of Lieutenant Clark, Agent Reyes, 4 state police tactical officers, 2 fish and wildlife experts, and the 3 of us. We set out as the sun was beginning to set, following a GPS route through the dense forest. Each of us was armed, Sullivan and I with rifles, Maria with a shotgun she handled with surprising confidence. The forest grew darker as we walked, the canopy overhead blocking out the fading daylight. Tactical lights cut through the gloom, creating pools of harsh illumination that made the shadows beyond seem even deeper. We moved in silence, alert for any sound or movement that might indicate the creature was nearby. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, we reached a small valley nestled between 2 steep ridges. Lieutenant Clark held up a hand, signaling for us to stop. "It's just ahead," he whispered. Over that rise, we crept forward, using the cover of the trees to approach the top of the rise. When we reached it, Clark gestured for us to get down, and we all dropped to our stomachs, crawling the last few feet to look down into the hollow beyond. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. In the center of the hollow, half buried in the earth and partially covered by vegetation, was a structure unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was roughly oval in shape, perhaps 30 feet long and 15 feet wide, constructed of a material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its surface was patterned with geometric shapes that didn't follow any human design logic, and there was an opening in one end that led to a dark interior. "What is that?" Maria whispered beside me. No one answered. We all knew what we were looking at, even if none of us wanted to be the first to say it. "We need to get closer," Agent Reyes said after a moment. "Document it. Collect samples." Lieutenant Clark nodded grimly. "Move in pairs. Keep your eyes open. If anyone sees the creature, fire a warning shot and fall back to this position." We descended into the hollow cautiously, weapons at the ready. As we drew closer to the structure, details became clearer. The material wasn't simply dark, but seemed to shift and change as if it wasn't entirely solid. The geometric patterns on its surface appeared to move slightly. Though whether this was an optical illusion or something else, I couldn't tell. Agent Reyes began photographing the structure, while one of the fish and wildlife experts took samples from the exterior using specialized equipment. The tactical officers formed a protective perimeter, their eyes scanning the surrounding forest. "Should we go inside?" Sullivan asked, his voice low. Lieutenant Clark hesitated, clearly torn between caution and the need to investigate thoroughly. 2 of us, he decided finally. "Quick recon, in and out, the rest maintain position out here." "I'll go," I volunteered, surprising myself. Despite the fear that churned in my gut, I felt a need to see, to understand what we were dealing with. Clark nodded. "Me too. The rest of you stay alert. If we're not out in 5 minutes, Reyes takes command." Maria caught my arm as I prepared to follow Clark to the entrance. "Be careful," she said, her eyes wide with concern. I squeezed her hand briefly, then moved toward the dark opening in the structure's side. Clark was already there, his tactical light illuminating a short passage that led to an interior chamber. "Stay behind me," he ordered, drawing his sidearm with his free hand. We entered the passage, the temperature dropping noticeably as we moved deeper into the structure. The walls of the passage were smooth and seamless, made of the same light-absorbing material as the exterior. There were no signs of joints or welds. It was as if the entire structure had been formed from a single piece of material. The passage opened into a circular chamber about 15 feet in diameter. Clark's light swept across the interior, revealing a space that defied easy description. There were no furnishings as such, but the walls were lined with protrusions and recesses that might have served as storage or control surfaces. The floor was uneven, with channels and raised sections arranged in patterns that made no immediate sense to human eyes. And everywhere, covering every surface, were those same geometric patterns we'd seen on the exterior, not carved or painted on, but seemingly an integral part of the material itself. "What is this place?" Clark whispered, his voice tight with tension or awe. I shook my head, words failing me. This was so far beyond my experience, beyond human experience, that language seemed inadequate. Clark's light caught something on the far side of the chamber, a recess different from the others, larger and deeper. We moved toward it cautiously, the beam of the tactical light revealing what appeared to be a collection of objects arranged with deliberate care. There were items of human manufacture: a watch, a hunting knife, a child's sneaker, a ranger's badge. and beside them, arranged with equal precision, were objects that were decidedly not human. Tools or devices made of the same shifting material as the structure, their purpose unknowable. "It's collecting things," I said softly. "Trophies," Clark nodded grimly. From its victims, a sound from outside made us both turn. A shout, followed by the crack of gunfire. Then more shots, and voices raised in alarm. "It's here," Sullivan's voice, urgency cutting through the walls of the structure. "Fall back, fall back." We ran for the entrance, emerging into chaos. The tactical team was firing into the trees at the edge of the hollow, where a pale shape moved with unnatural speed, circling the perimeter of the clearing. Maria and Sullivan were backing toward the structure, weapons raised. "Get to cover!" Clark shouted, drawing his sidearm and firing at the moving shape. The creature broke from the tree line, its elongated form fully visible in the harsh light of the tactical beams. It moved with that strange, jerky grace, covering ground with impossible speed. One of the tactical officers went down, the creature's clawed hand raking across his chest in a spray of blood. Agent Reyes fired her rifle, the bullet striking the creature in the shoulder. Dark fluid spurted from the wound, but the creature barely slowed, changing direction to charge toward her. I raised my rifle and fired, aiming for the creature's head. The shot went wide, and the creature veered again, this time toward Sullivan and Maria. "Into the structure," Clark shouted. "Now!" It was the only defensible position. The structure's single entrance would force the creature to come at us head-on, where we could concentrate our fire. We fell back, dragging the wounded officer with us. The creature pursued, that high, keening wail cutting through the night as it closed the distance. We made it inside just as the creature reached the entrance. Sullivan and one of the tactical officers fired simultaneously, the bullets striking the creature's chest. It staggered back, dark fluid pouring from multiple wounds, but it didn't fall. Instead, it retreated a few steps, those pale eyes fixed on the entrance, calculating. "It's smart," Maria whispered beside me. "It's trying to figure out how to get to us." She was right. The creature circled the entrance, studying it from different angles, probing for weaknesses. It made that guttural, almost speech sound again, and I had the unsettling feeling that it was communicating, though whether with us or with itself I couldn't tell. "Keep your weapons trained on the entrance," Clark ordered. "If it comes through, everyone fire at once." We waited in tense silence, the wounded officers labored, breathing the only sound besides the occasional guttural vocalization from outside. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, though my watch told me less than 30 minutes had passed. "What's it waiting for?" one of the tactical officers whispered. No one had an answer. The creature continued its patient circling, occasionally approaching the entrance only to retreat again when our weapons tracked its movement. Then, without warning, it changed tactics. It moved to the side of the structure, out of our line of sight from the entrance. There was a sound of scraping, then a low, rhythmic thumping, as if it was striking the exterior wall. "What's it doing?" Maria asked, her voice tight with tension. Sullivan shook his head. "I don't know, but I don't like it." The thumping continued, growing louder and more insistent. Then came a new sound, a high-pitched keening that seemed to emanate not from the creature but from the structure itself. The walls around us began to vibrate subtly, the geometric patterns shifting more rapidly. "It's doing something to the structure," Agent Reyes said, alarm clear in her voice. Before any of us could respond, a section of the wall where the thumping had been suddenly changed. There's no other word for it. The solid material became translucent, then transparent, revealing the creature on the other side. It stood with its hand pressed against the wall, those pale eyes staring through at us. The wall continued to change, becoming less substantial, as if the creature was somehow phasing it out of existence. "Fire!" Clark shouted, and we all turned our weapons toward the thinning wall. Bullets passed through the increasingly insubstantial barrier, striking the creature beyond. It jerked back, dark fluid spraying from new wounds, but the damage to the wall was done. A hole had formed, large enough for the creature to reach through. One long-fingered, clawed hand thrust into the chamber, grasping at the nearest person, one of the fish and wildlife experts. The man screamed as those claws dug into his arm, dragging him toward the opening. Sullivan lunged forward, his rifle forgotten as he grabbed the man's other arm, trying to pull him back. "Help me," he shouted. I dropped my rifle and grabbed the man's belt, adding my strength to Sullivan's. Agent Reyes joined us, and together we managed to halt his progress toward the hole. The creature's strength was incredible. Even with 3 of us pulling against it, we could feel the man being inexorably drawn toward that hole in the wall. His screams had given way to a high, keening wail not unlike the creature's own. "Shoot it," Clark ordered, and the tactical officers redirected their fire through the hole. The creature's grip suddenly released, and we fell backward in a tangle of limbs, the fish and wildlife expert collapsing on top of us. His arm was a mangled mess where the creature's claws had dug in, blood pulsing from deep gashes. Outside, the creature had retreated from the wall, wounded but still mobile. It circled the structure again, that guttural vocalization now containing notes that sounded almost like frustration or rage. "We need to get these wounded men out of here," Agent Reyes said, applying a field dressing to the fish and wildlife expert's arm. "They need medical attention." Clark nodded grimly. "But we're trapped as long as that thing is out there." As if in response to his words, the creature suddenly went silent. The circling stopped, and for a long moment, there was no sound from outside. "Where did it go?" Maria whispered, peering through the entrance. No one answered. We all strained our ears, listening for any hint of the creature's presence. Nothing but the normal sounds of the forest at night reached us. "Maybe it's withdrawn to lick its wounds," Sullivan suggested. "We hit it pretty hard." "Or maybe it's setting a trap," I countered. "It's smart enough." We waited, tense and alert for any sign of the creature's return. The minutes stretched into an hour, and still there was nothing. The wounded men were growing weaker, their need for medical attention increasingly urgent. "We need to risk it," Clark decided finally. "Form a defensive formation, wounded in the center." We moved together, quickly but carefully. We organized ourselves as he directed, weapons facing outward, the 2 wounded men supported between us. At Clark's signal, we moved out of the structure and into the hollow beyond. The night was quiet, the forest seemingly empty. We made our way up the slope, every sense alert for any sign of the creature. Nothing moved in the darkness beyond our tactical lights. We reached the top of the rise without incident, which only heightened my sense of unease. The creature had been relentless in its pursuit earlier. Why would it withdraw now? "I don't like this," Sullivan muttered beside me, echoing my thoughts. "It's too easy." We continued through the forest, retracing our path back toward the ranger station. The tactical officers maintained a tight formation around the wounded men, while Sullivan, Maria, and I scouted ahead into the sides, alert for any movement. We were perhaps halfway back to the station when Maria suddenly froze, raising her hand in a signal to stop. She pointed silently to our left, where a faint glow was visible through the trees. Clark signaled for the group to take cover, and we all crouched behind trees or rocks, weapons trained toward the glow. It was moving, coming closer, and as it approached, I realized it wasn't one light but several, flashlights, carried by a group moving through the forest. "Identify yourselves," Clark called out, his voice authoritative. "Lieutenant Clark," a voice called back. "This is Captain Reeves, State Police Tactical Unit. We were sent to find you when you missed your check-in." Relief washed over me. Reinforcements. We could get the wounded men to safety and bring more resources to bear against the creature. Clark confirmed his identity, and moments later a group of heavily armed state police officers emerged from the trees. They quickly assessed our situation, calling for medical evacuation for the wounded men and establishing a protective perimeter around our group. "What happened out there?" Captain Reeves asked as we resumed our journey back to the ranger station, now with the added security of his tactical unit. Clark hesitated, exchanging a look with Sullivan and me before answering. "We found something in a hollow about 2 miles northeast of here. A structure of some kind, not natural, not human-made. And we encountered the creature that's been killing people in the forest. It's injured but still alive, still dangerous." Reeves's expression was skeptical, but he didn't press for details. "We'll send in a larger force at first light, secure the area and deal with this creature once and for all." I wasn't sure it would be that simple, but I kept my doubts to myself. The important thing now was to get back to safety, to regroup and plan our next move. We reached the ranger station without further incident, The wounded men immediately transferred to waiting ambulances. The station was even more heavily fortified now, with armed personnel at all approaches and powerful lights illuminating the clearing. Clark, Sullivan, Maria, and I were ushered into the command center, where a debriefing was already being organized. Senior officers from the state police, representatives from Fish and Wildlife, even a man in a dark suit who was introduced only as an observer from a federal agency, listened intently as we described what we had found in the hollow and our encounter with the creature. The skepticism was palpable, especially when Sullivan bluntly stated his belief that the creature was not from here. The federal observer asked numerous questions about the structure, its composition, the patterns on its surface, the way the wall had changed when the creature touched it. His lack of surprise was interesting, and I wondered how much he already knew. As the debriefing continued, I found myself growing increasingly detached from the proceedings. The events of the past 2 days seemed almost unreal now, as if I had stepped temporarily into a different world and was now returning to normality. But the memory of those pale, unblinking eyes, that lipless mouth with its rows of needle teeth remained vivid and disturbing. Later, as dawn approached, I stood on the porch of the ranger station, looking out at the forest beyond the perimeter lights. Maria joined me, her face drawn with exhaustion but her eyes alert. "What do you think will happen now?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "I don't know. They'll send in more people, more weapons. They'll try to kill it, capture it, study it. But I'm not sure they understand what they're dealing with. And the structure? The ship?" Neither of us had used that word before, but we both knew that's what it was. A vessel that had brought the creature here, from somewhere beyond our world. "They'll study that too," I said. "Try to understand it, maybe even try to use its technology, but I'm not sure they should." Maria was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the dark line of trees that marked the edge of the forest. "Do you think there are more of them out there? More creatures like the one we saw?" The question sent a chill through me. I had been so focused on the immediate threat that I hadn't considered the larger implications. If one had found its way here, could others follow? Were they already here, waiting in the shadows of forests around the world? "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think we need to be prepared for the possibility." In the days that followed, a massive operation was launched in the Lewis and Clark National Forest. Military personnel joined state police and wildlife officials in a coordinated search for the creature and a detailed investigation of the structure in the hollow. The area was declared off-limits to the public, with a cover story about a dangerous escaped predator from a private wildlife sanctuary. Sullivan, Maria, and I were debriefed multiple times, each session more detailed than the last. Our wounds healed, but the psychological scars remained. I found myself startled by shadows, jumping at unexpected sounds, waking from nightmares where pale, elongated forms pursued me through endless corridors of pine, and in those dreams I sometimes heard that guttural vocalization, that almost speech that seemed to contain meaning just beyond comprehension. It was as if the creature was trying to communicate, to tell us something important. But what that message might be, I couldn't begin to guess. 3 weeks after our encounter in the hollow, I was sitting in my cabin at the edge of the forest, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the sunrise through my kitchen window, when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Lieutenant Clark standing on my porch, his face grim. "We need you at the ranger station," he said without preamble. "Something's happened." I didn't ask for details, just grabbed my jacket and followed him to his waiting vehicle. As we drove through the early morning light, Clark filled me in. "The search teams found something in the northeastern sector last night," he said, his voice tight. "Not the creature, but evidence, signs that there might be more than one." My blood ran cold. "More than one creature?" Clark nodded grimly. "Tracks, different from the ones we've been following, smaller, but with the same distinctive pattern. And there've been reports from other forests across the country, strange sightings, unexplained disappearances, unusual structures hidden in remote areas." I absorbed this in silence, the implications too vast and terrifying to fully process. If there were more of these creatures, if they were spreading across the country, across the world, what about the structure in the hollow? I asked finally. "The ship?" Clark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Gone," he said simply. "Disappeared 3 days ago while it was under guard. The men on duty reported a high-pitched sound, a flash of light, and then nothing. The entire structure vanished, leaving only a depression in the ground where it had been. I stared at him, trying to make sense of this new information. And the creature? The one we encountered? Still out there, Clark admitted. We've tracked it, cornered it a few times, but it always manages to escape. It's wounded, weakening, but still dangerous. And now, with these new signs, he didn't need to finish the thought. If there were more creatures, if the ship had somehow activated or called for reinforcements, the situation was far more serious than we had imagined. We arrived at the ranger station to find it transformed into a military-style command center. Armed personnel moved with purpose between buildings. Communications equipment hummed, and in the center of it all, a large map was spread across a table, marked with colored pins indicating sightings, encounters, and evidence. Sullivan and Maria were already there, along with Agent Reyes and the man in the dark suit who had been present at our debriefing. They looked up as we entered, their faces grave. "We need to talk," the man in the suit said, gesturing to a side room where we could speak privately. As we followed him, I glanced back at the map with its scatter of pins across the northwestern states. The pattern was clear, even at a glance. Whatever had come to the Lewis and Clark National Forest was spreading, moving outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that what had begun in that dim corridor of pines was only the beginning of a much larger, much darker story. A story that would change our world forever. In the dim corridor of pines, I heard ragged breathing behind me, so close I felt the terrifying warm exhalation on my neck. And I realized that if I dared to turn around, I might not survive any next moment. But I did turn, and what I saw in those pale, unblinking eyes was not just hunger or rage, but recognition. It knew me as I knew it. And in that moment of connection, I understood a terrible truth. It had chosen me, marked me, and no matter how far I ran, how well I hid, it would find me again. My name is Jonathan Pierce, and this happened back in 2013 at the Lewis and Clark National Forest in Montana. I'm telling this story now as a warning. Watch the shadows among the trees. Listen for sounds that don't belong. And if you ever find yourself alone in the forest, feeling that quiet that presses on you, that sense of being watched by something just beyond your vision, run. Don't look back, just run. Because they're out there, waiting, watching, hunting, and they're not alone. I never believed in monsters until I became a park ranger at Sile Forest. The elders of the nearby Navajo reservation warned me about this place, but I dismissed their concerns as superstition. 6 months into my posting at the most remote ranger station in the Arizona wilderness, I discovered how terribly wrong I was. My name is Alex Mercer. After 8 years with the National Park Service in more populated areas, I requested a transfer to somewhere quiet, somewhere I could escape the endless stream of tourists and truly connect with nature. When the position opened at Sale Forest's northern outpost, I jumped at the opportunity despite warnings from colleagues who'd worked the area before. "That place gets to you," my former supervisor had said, his eyes distant. "The isolation isn't like anything you've experienced before." The ranger station was a weathered log cabin built in the 1940s, positioned on a small ridge overlooking Mirage Lake. The nearest town was a 90-minute drive along winding dirt roads that became impassable during the heavy rains. Cell service was non-existent, and the radio worked only sporadically. For most of the year, I was completely alone. That first night at the cabin, I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the lake copper and gold. The pristine wilderness stretched for miles in every direction, towering pines, rugged cliffs, and untamed forest. As darkness fell, an unnatural silence descended, no crickets chirping, no owls hooting. Just the whisper of wind through the pines. I told myself it was just the altitude playing tricks on me, but deep down I felt something watching from the tree line. 3 months passed without incident. I settled into a routine of maintenance work, wildlife surveys, and occasional rescue operations for hikers who ventured too far from established trails. Then came the first disappearance. A geology professor from the university in Flagstaff had obtained a permit to collect samples near the eastern ridge. When he didn't return to his base camp after 2 days, his research assistant radioed for help. I organized a search party with 2 local guides who knew the terrain. We found his equipment scattered across a clearing, sample bags, GPS unit, water bottle, but no sign of the professor. What disturbed me most were the tracks around the site. They looked like a large coyote or wolf had circled the area repeatedly. But the prints were wrong. The stride was too long, the impressions too deep for an animal of that size. One of the guides, an older Navajo man named Hosteen, knelt to examine the tracks. His weathered face grew pale. "We should leave," he whispered, standing abruptly. "Now. We can't just abandon the search," I argued. "He could be injured somewhere nearby." Hosteen shook his head. "He's gone. And if we stay after dark, we'll be gone too." The other guide, a younger man named Kyle, looked uncomfortable but sided with me. "We've got to at least try, man. It's our job." Hosteen muttered something in Navajo and reluctantly agreed to continue until dusk. We found nothing else that day, nor in the week that followed. The official report listed the professor as missing, presumed dead from exposure or animal attack. But I couldn't shake the memory of Hosteen's fear. 2 weeks later, Kyle disappeared while checking trail markers near Mirage Lake. His truck was found at the trailhead, keys still in the ignition. The search effort was more extensive this time. Helicopter sweeps, cadaver dogs, volunteers from 3 counties. Nothing. I visited Hosteen at his home on the reservation, hoping he might share what he knew. The old man sat in silence for a long time before speaking. "There are things in these woods that shouldn't be disturbed," he finally said. "The old ones called them Yinald Lushi skinwalkers, humans who have traded their souls for power, who can take the shape of animals. They've been in these mountains longer than any of us." I wanted to dismiss his words as folklore, but the fear in his eyes was real. "How do you know it's one of those?" I asked. "The signs are there for those who know how to read them. No birds singing near the hunting grounds, tracks that change from animal to human and back, the feeling of being watched." He fixed me with a steady gaze. "You felt it too." I couldn't deny it. Since Kyle's disappearance, the sensation of unseen eyes following my movements had intensified. Sometimes at night, I heard what sounded like footsteps circling the cabin, too rhythmic to be an animal but too quick for a human. "What do they want?" I asked. "To feed, to corrupt, to spread fear." Hosteen stood slowly. "You should leave that place. Request a transfer before winter comes. I can't just abandon my post. Then you'd better learn how to protect yourself." He disappeared into another room and returned with a small leather pouch. "White ash. Keep it with you always. It's the only thing they fear." I took the pouch, still uncertain whether to believe him but unwilling to dismiss the warning entirely. That night I returned to the cabin later than planned. The forest was already dark under a moonless sky, and my headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the pitch-black woods. 2 miles from the station, my truck's engine sputtered and died. I tried the radio. Static. With no other option, I grabbed my flashlight and pack and started walking. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, swallowing the beam of my light. The silence was absolute. No wind, no insects, no rustling leaves. Then I heard it. A sound like labored breathing, moving parallel to me in the woods. I quickened my pace, and the breathing matched my tempo. A branch snapped behind me and I broke into a run. The breathing grew louder, joined by the soft thud of footfalls. Whatever pursued me was running on all fours, but the rhythm was wrong, more like a human crudely imitating an animal's gait. The cabin appeared ahead, a dark silhouette against the night sky. I sprinted for the door, fumbling with the keys as the footsteps closed in. As I finally pushed inside and slammed the door, something heavy crashed against it from the other side. I braced myself against the door, heart pounding. Outside, the thing circled the cabin, its breathing now interspersed with a sound that turned my blood to ice. A human voice, distorted and twisted, calling my name. "Alex, Alex." I reached for my sidearm with trembling hands. The voice at the window sounded exactly like Kyle. "Help me, Alex. I'm hurt. Let me in." The leather pouch Hosteen had given me seemed to grow warm in my pocket. I pulled it out and positioned myself in the center of the cabin's main room, away from all windows and doors. "Alex, please." A shadow passed across the window, tall and hunched, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. The voice changed, becoming older, accented. "Ranger? Is anyone there?" My car broke down. It was trying different lures, I realized. Different voices to tempt me outside. For hours it continued. Voices of colleagues, hikers I'd rescued, even my family members, each plea more desperate than the last. Each voice perfectly mimicked, but somehow hollow. Dawn came after what felt like an eternity. The voices stopped, and birds began to sing again in the forest. I sank to the floor, exhausted but alive. I knew then that Hostine was right. Something ancient and malevolent haunted these woods, something that wore stolen faces and hungered for more. And somehow it had marked me as its next prey. Winter was coming, and with it the long darkness. If I was going to survive, I needed to understand what I was facing. More importantly, I needed to learn how to fight back. Chapter 2. Voices from the Shadows. The morning after my encounter, I sat at my desk with shaking hands, attempting to file a report that wouldn't get me immediately transferred for psychiatric evaluation. How could I explain that something had stalked me through the woods, mimicking human voices with impossible accuracy? That it had known exactly which voices would tempt me to open the door? In the end, I logged only the truck breakdown and my return to the station on foot. Some truths are better left undocumented in official channels. I spent the day securing the cabin, checking window locks, reinforcing the door with a chair. The leather pouch of white ash remained in my pocket, a constant presence against my leg. I wasn't sure if I believed in its power, but I wasn't taking chances. That afternoon, I radioed headquarters to report my vehicle malfunction. They promised a replacement vehicle and supplies within 3 days, weather permitting. 3 days alone in the cabin with whatever waited in the woods. As dusk approached, I found myself standing at the window, scanning the tree line. The forest looked peaceful, mundane. A hawk circled lazily above the pines. The deer and her fawn grazed at the edge of the clearing. Everything appeared normal, yet the weight of watching eyes remained. My radio crackled suddenly, making me jump. "Repeat. Any ranger at Sile North Station, do you copy?" The voice was broken by static, but recognizable as Linda from dispatch. "This is Mercer at Sailor North. Go ahead." "Alex, thank God, we've got a situation. Group of hikers reported missing near your sector. Last known position approximately 3 miles northeast of your station, near the old mining trail." My stomach nodded. "How many?" "3. College students from Phoenix. They were supposed to check in with their guide 2 days ago, and they're just reporting this now?" The guide thought they might have decided to extend their trip. When they missed their second checkpoint, he called it in. I glanced at the darkening sky. "It's almost nightfall. I can head out first thing tomorrow." "These kids could be injured out there," Linda persisted. "Temperatures dropping. If they're exposed," she was right, of course. That was the job, finding people, bringing them back safe. Even if it meant venturing into the woods after dark. Even with what I now knew lurked there. "I'll gear up and head out. Keep this channel open." I packed quickly. First aid kit, emergency blankets, GPS, extra batteries, water. As an afterthought, I scattered some of the white ash across the threshold of the cabin door and windows, feeling slightly foolish but somehow safer for having done it. The last light was fading as I set out, following the old mining trail. The forest grew denser as I moved northeast, the pines closing in overhead until only patches of purpling sky remained visible. My flashlight cut a narrow path through the gathering darkness. The feeling of being watched intensified with every step. Twice I spun around, certain something was following me, only to find empty trail behind me. The woods were preternaturally quiet again. No night birds, no rustling underbrush, no insects chirping. After an hour of hiking, I reached a fork in the trail. To the left, the path continued toward the abandoned mine. To the right, a narrower trail led to a high ridge overlooking the valley. I hesitated, unsure which way the missing hikers would have gone. A twig snapped in the darkness to my left. "Hello?" I called, swinging my flashlight toward the sound. "Park ranger, anyone there?" Silence answered me. Then, faintly, I heard what sounded like someone crying, a young woman's voice coming from the mine trail. I moved cautiously in that direction, calling out periodically to identify myself. The crying grew louder, punctuated by words I couldn't quite make out. The trail opened into a small clearing where the entrance to the old copper mine gaped like a wound in the hillside. The crying seemed to emanate from inside. "This is Park Ranger Mercer," I announced, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I'm here to help. Is anyone injured?" The crying stopped abruptly. Something shuffled in the darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. "Hello?" I stepped closer to the mine entrance, sweeping my light across the weathered timbers. A voice spoke directly behind me. "They went inside. All of them." I whirled around, nearly dropping my flashlight. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, a Native American man, elderly, wearing a Park Service uniform that looked decades out of date. His face was deeply lined, his eyes reflecting my flashlight with an unnatural gleam. "Sir? Who went inside?" "The young ones. So many young ones over the years." He remained perfectly still, not even appearing to breathe. "They hear voices calling, they follow." An alarm bell rang in my mind. Something was wrong with this man, with the way he stood, with the flatness in his voice. "Are you with the Park Service?" I asked, taking a step backward. "I was, for 37 years." His head tilted at an odd angle. "Until I followed the voices too." I reached slowly for the pouch in my pocket, fingers closing around it as the old man took a single, gliding step forward. "You hear them too, don't you, Ranger Mercer?" The voices in the dark. He knew my name. I hadn't told him my name. "I need to find the missing hikers," I said, continuing to back away. "Oh, you'll find them." His face split in a smile that was too wide, too full of teeth. "Just like I found the others. The geologist, the guide. So many curious souls." He took another step, and in the shifting beam of my flashlight, I caught a glimpse of what looked like coarse fur beneath the cuff of his uniform sleeve. "What are you?" I whispered. "I am hunger," he replied, his voice deepening, roughening. "I am the shadow between worlds. I am the one who wears the skins of the unwary." I pulled the leather pouch from my pocket and held it before me like a shield. The old man, the thing wearing an old man's shape, hissed and retreated a step. "Clever ranger," it growled, its voice no longer human. "The old ones taught you their tricks." "Stay back," I warned, opening the pouch and gripping a handful of the white ash. It laughed, a horrible sound like breaking bones. "Your borrowed magic is weak. When the snow comes and the nights grow long, you will open your door to me. They all do, in the end." From the mine entrance behind me came the sound of movement, multiple footsteps approaching from the darkness. I didn't dare turn around. "The young ones are waking," the creature said, its form beginning to blur and shift in ways my mind couldn't quite process. "They're hungry too." I threw the ash directly at its face. It shrieked, a piercing, inhuman sound that echoed through the trees and recoiled, its features momentarily distorting into something lupine and twisted. I ran, away from the mine, away from the thing that had once been a park ranger, away from whatever was stirring in the darkness of the abandoned tunnels. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I found myself in unfamiliar territory. The trail was gone. The dense forest surrounded me, identical in every direction. I was lost. The radio at my belt hissed with static. I raised it to my ear, desperate for human contact. "This is Mercer. I need emergency extraction. My position is..." I looked around hopelessly. "Unknown." Through the static came a voice, not Linda's from dispatch, but a young woman's, trembling with fear. "Help us, please. We're in the old mine. Something's hunting us." Then a man's voice cut in, older, authoritative. "Ranger Mercer, return to the mine immediately. We have located the missing hikers." Another voice, a young man's. "Alex, is that you, man? We need help. We're hurt bad." The voices overlapped, pleading, commanding, enticing me to turn back. I switched off the radio with shaking hands. They weren't real. None of them were real. I took a deep breath and tried to orient myself. The North Star peeked through the canopy overhead. If I headed west, I should eventually intersect the main trail back to the cabin. As I walked, I became increasingly certain something was pacing me through the trees. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow flowing like water between the trunks, always just out of direct sight. The voices followed too, no longer needing the radio. They whispered from the darkness around me, sometimes so close I could feel phantom breath on my neck. "Alex, help us. Don't leave us here. It's so cold." I clutched the nearly empty pouch of ash and kept moving, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. West, always west. After what seemed like hours, the trees began to thin. Through the gaps, I could make out the silhouette of my cabin on the ridge, a single light burning in the window. I hadn't left a light on. I approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows. Through the window, I could see a figure moving inside, a human shape preparing something at the stove. Relief flooded through me. Headquarters must have sent someone after I reported the missing hikers. Someone who found the spare key and made themselves at home. I was halfway across the clearing when I remembered. The spare key was in my pocket. I froze, watching the figure inside my cabin. It moved with fluid grace, humming softly to itself, a tune I recognized as one my mother used to sing when I was a child. No one alive knew that melody. The figure paused, as if sensing my presence, and slowly turned toward the window. For an instant, I saw my own face looking back at me, smiling with too many teeth. Then the light went out. Chapter 3. The Hollow Ones. I remained frozen at the edge of the clearing, staring at the now darkened cabin. My cabin with something wearing my face inside it. The logical part of my brain screamed that this was impossible, a hallucination born of stress and isolation. But the primal part, the ancient instinct that recognizes predators, knew better. What waited inside was real, and it was hungry. I retreated silently into the tree line, mind racing. I couldn't go back to the cabin. I couldn't risk encountering whatever had taken my form. But where could I go? The forest was full of dangers I was only beginning to understand, and the cold night air was already seeping through my jacket. Hosteen. I needed to reach him, to learn more about what I was facing. Moving as quietly as possible, I circled wide around the cabin toward the service road. If I could reach my disabled truck, I might be able to get it running again, or at least use it for shelter until morning. The night had become unnaturally still. No wind rustled the pine needles. No animals moved in the underbrush. The silence was complete, oppressive, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. I found the service road and followed it, keeping to the shadows whenever possible. Every few minutes I glanced back toward the cabin. Once I thought I saw a figure standing on the porch watching my retreat, but when I looked again it was gone. The truck sat where I'd left it, a dark silhouette against the starlit road. I approached cautiously, examining it for any signs of tampering. Finding none, I unlocked the door and slid behind the wheel, locking it again immediately. The key turned in the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. I slumped back, weighing my options. The cabin was compromised. The truck was dead. The nearest ranger station was 20 miles away through dense forest. And somewhere out there, something that could wear human faces was hunting me. Movement caught my eye. A flash of pale fur in the moonlight, darting between trees alongside the road. I sat perfectly still, barely breathing, as a large coyote emerged from the forest. Except it wasn't quite a coyote. Its proportions were wrong. Legs too long, shoulders too high, head too large. And it moved with an unnatural grace, almost like a human might if forced to walk on all fours. The creature paused at the edge of the road, yellow eyes fixed on the truck. On me. Its mouth opened in what looked disturbingly like a smile. A voice spoke directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. "Cold night to be a lone ranger." I recoiled, pressing myself against the door. The coyote thing took a step closer. "You could have stayed in the warm cabin, with yourself." It made a sound like laughter. "Don't you want to meet yourself, Alex Mercer?" "What are you?" I whispered. "We are the Hollow Ones. The Skin Changers. The hunger that walks." It took another step toward the truck. "We have worn many names over the centuries. Your kind called us skinwalkers. Before that, other names, older names. What do you want from me?" "What we want from all your kind. To taste your fear, to wear your skin, to be you for a time." Its head tilted, studying me. "You are different from the others. You see us clearly, Most don't, until it's too late. I remembered the missing hikers, the Professor Kyle. The others, are they dead? Not dead. Changed. Hollowed out. Walking the spaces between worlds. The creature's form seemed to ripple, momentarily becoming more human-like before settling back into coyote shape. Your friend Kyle sings beautifully now. His voice calls others to us. Horror washed over me. The voices in the forest, on the radio. They weren't just mimicry. They were the actual voices of the taken, somehow preserved and used as lures. Why tell me this? Why not just take me? The chase sweetens the feast. It sank onto its haunches, regarding me with those intelligent yellow eyes. And you carry old magic, weak but present. We respect the old ways even as we hunger. The leather pouch in my pocket. I slipped my hand inside my jacket, fingers closing around it. Your ash will run out, Ranger. And then you will join the hollow chorus. There are others who know where I am, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They'll come looking. Good? The thing's mouth widened in that grotesque smile again. We are always hungry for more. With that, it turned and trotted back into the forest, disappearing among the shadows. But I knew it wasn't gone. Not really. It was watching, waiting for me to leave the relative safety of the truck. I spent the night there, huddled in my jacket, jumping at every sound. Sometime before dawn, exhaustion claimed me, and I fell into a fitful sleep. I dreamed of running through endless forest, pursued by shadows that wore familiar faces. I dreamed of a cavern deep beneath the earth, where hollow-eyed figures swayed and sang, their voices creating a harmony that pulled me deeper, deeper. I woke with a start as sunlight streamed through the windshield. For a moment I sat disoriented, memories of the night before seeming distant and unreal in the clear light of day. Then I saw the tracks circling the truck. Dozens of prints in the soft earth, some like coyote paws, others disturbingly like bare human feet. They had surrounded me all night while I slept. With shaking hands, I tried the ignition again. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. I slammed the truck into gear and sped toward the highway, not even glancing back at the cabin. I needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them. The reservation was quiet when I arrived. Children played in dusty yards, and old men sat smoking outside the small general store. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary, that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the entire ordeal. I found Haustin outside his small house, tending to a garden of medicinal herbs. He looked up as I approached, his weathered face registering no surprise. "You've seen them," he said simply. I nodded, collapsing onto the bench beside him. Words tumbled out of me. The thing at the mine, the creature in my cabin, the coyote thing by the truck. Haustin listened without interruption, his expression grave. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "The skinwalkers have been in these mountains since before my people came," he finally said. "They were ancient when the first Navajo spoke their name. They hunger for essence, the spark that makes each soul unique. It said I was different, that I could see them clearly." Haustin nodded. "Some are born with the sight. It is both gift and curse. How do I fight them?" The ash helped, but the ash is temporary protection only. A barrier, not a weapon. He rose stiffly and motioned for me to follow him inside. There are stronger measures, but they come with a price. The interior of his home was dim and fragrant with dried herbs. On one wall hung masks and ceremonial items I didn't recognize. From a cedar chest he withdrew a small object wrapped in red cloth. "This was my grandfather's," he said, unwrapping the bundle to reveal an ornate knife with a bone handle. Strange symbols were etched into the blade. "It is said to sever the connection between a skinwalker and its stolen form, forcing it back to its original shape." He held it out to me, his expression solemn. "I can't take this," I protested. "You must. They have marked you now. They will not stop hunting until they wear your skin or you destroy them." His gnarled hand closed mine around the knife's handle. "But remember, to use this blade is to acknowledge their world, to step partly into it. There is no turning back from such knowledge. I just want to be safe, to make sure no one else disappears." "Then listen carefully." He lowered his voice. "Skinwalkers cannot enter a dwelling uninvited. They can take forms, mimic voices, even project thoughts to lure you out. But they cannot cross the threshold unless welcomed. Something was in my cabin last night, I said. Then you invited it in, knowingly or not. He shook his head. Words have power in their world, names especially. Never speak your full name aloud in the forest. Never respond directly to a voice calling from the darkness. I thought of all the protocols I'd broken. Identifying myself fully over the radio, calling out to the voices at the mine. What about the people they've taken? The hikers, Kyle. Are they really still alive somehow? Hostein's face grew sad. Their essence remains, trapped between worlds. Their voices are used as bait. Their memories are consumed slowly, savored. It is not a fate to envy. Can they be saved? Legend speaks of those who were recovered before the hollowing was complete, but it requires confronting the skinwalkers in their own domain. He placed a hand on my shoulder. You are not ready for such a journey, but first you must protect yourself. Secure your dwelling. Learn to recognize their signs. He rewrapped the knife and pressed it into my hands. And decide whether this fight is truly yours to undertake. I left the reservation with the knife, a new pouch of white ash, and instructions for creating protective symbols around the cabin. Hostein had offered to perform a cleansing ceremony at the station, but warned it would take time to prepare. As I drove back toward the forest, the sun began its descent toward the horizon. I'd have to hurry to reach the cabin before dark. Something moved in the road ahead. A figure walking along the shoulder. As I drew closer, I recognized Kyle's lanky form and red flannel shirt. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop beside him. He turned, and for an instant I saw the familiar face of my missing colleague. Then I noticed his eyes, flat, empty, like glass marbles. And the way he moved, too fluid, as if his joints worked differently now. Alex, he said, smiling with too many teeth. I've been looking everywhere for you. Chapter 4. The long night. I stared at the thing wearing Kyle's face, my hand instinctively moving toward the knife hidden in my jacket. You're not Kyle, I said, keeping the truck between us. Its smile widened unnaturally. Of course I am. Who else would I be? It took a step closer. I got lost in the woods, but I found my way back. Aren't you happy to see me? Stay back. It tilted Kyle's head at an impossible angle. What's wrong, Alex? You look like you've seen a ghost. It laughed. Kyle's laugh, but hollow, echoing as if from a great distance. What happened to the real Kyle? I demanded. I am the real Kyle. It spread its arms. Just improved, enhanced. I see things now, Alex. Beautiful, terrible things in the spaces between. You could see them too. My fingers closed around the bone handle of the knife. I need to get back to the station. I'll come with you. It took another step. We have so much to catch up on. No. I began backing toward the driver's side door. I'm going alone. Its expression shifted, something ancient and hungry surfacing behind Kyle's features. The forest isn't safe after dark, Alex. You shouldn't be alone. Better alone than with you. The thing wearing Kyle's skin hissed, the sound entirely inhuman. You can't escape us. We're in your cabin. We're in your radio. We're in your dreams. It smiled again, teeth lengthening visibly. We're already inside you, Ranger. You just don't know it yet. I yanked open the truck door and jumped inside, locking it immediately. Through the window, I watched as Kyle's form began to blur and stretch, his features melting like wax. I gunned the engine and sped past, not looking back. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of something loping into the forest on all fours. Something neither human nor animal. The sun was setting as I reached the ranger station. I parked some distance away, observing the cabin for signs of activity. Everything looked normal. No lights, no movement, no indication that anything lurked inside. Still, I approached cautiously, clutching the knife in one hand and the pouch of ash in the other. At the door, I hesitated, remembering Hostein's warning. If a skinwalker had been inside, I had somehow invited it in. I examined the threshold carefully. There, almost invisible against the weathered wood, was a symbol carved into the doorframe. It resembled a twisted figure, half human, half animal. A marker, I realized, a sign to others of its kind that this place was claimed. Following Hostein's instructions, I removed a small container of salt from my pack and traced a protective sigil over the carved symbol. Then I scattered ash across the threshold and whispered the Navajo protection prayer he had taught me. The words felt strange on my tongue, but as I spoke them, the air around the cabin seemed to shift subtly, as if a current had passed through it. I entered cautiously, knife ready. The interior was exactly as I'd left it, with no sign that anything had been disturbed. Still, I methodically checked every room, every closet, under every piece of furniture. Nothing. Exhausted but not yet willing to rest, I set about securing the cabin according to Hostein's instructions. Salt across every threshold and windowsill. Protective symbols drawn in ash at each corner of the building. Juniper branches, which I'd collected from the reservation, hung above doors and windows. By the time I finished, full darkness had fallen. I sat at the kitchen table, the knife before me, and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The skinwalkers were real. They had been taking people, the professor, the hikers, Kyle, and somehow using their essence, their voices, to lure more victims. They wanted me too, had marked me for reasons I didn't fully understand, and I was utterly alone against them. The radio on my belt crackled suddenly, making me jump. "Seal North Station, this is headquarters, do you copy?" Linda's voice, clear and professional. I hesitated, remembering the false voices on the radio the night before. But this was different. A scheduled check-in, not a mysterious transmission in the forest. "This is Mercer at Sail North. Go ahead." "Alex, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you since yesterday." I paused, unsure how much to reveal. "Investigating those missing hikers. Radio reception was bad in the eastern sector." "Did you find anything?" A hollow laugh echoed in my memory. "Your friend Kyle sings beautifully now." "No," I lied. "No sign of them. I'm going to extend the search area tomorrow." "Hold off on that. We've got a storm system moving in. Heavy snow expected by tomorrow afternoon. Headquarters wants all remote stations battened down until it passes." "Snow." The creature's words came back to me. "When the snow comes and the nights grow long, you will open your door to me." "How long is the system expected to last?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. 3 days, maybe 4. You're stocked up for that, right?" "Yes." Another lie. I had maybe 2 days of supplies left. "I'll be fine." "Good. We'll check in when we can, but if the storm is as bad as they're predicting, communications might go down completely." "Understood." "And Alex, be careful out there. Something feels off about this whole situation with the missing hikers." If only she knew. After signing off, I double-checked all the protective measures and prepared for a long night. Sleep seemed dangerous, but I needed rest if I was going to face whatever came next. I pushed the small couch against the wall farthest from any windows or doors and lay down, the knife within easy reach. Despite my exhaustion, sleep was elusive. Every creak of the cabin's old timbers, every whisper of wind through the pines outside, set my nerves on edge. When I finally did drift off, the dreams came immediately, vivid, terrifying visions of being pursued through endless forest, of faces melting and reforming, of a dark cavern where hollow-eyed figures swayed to an ancient rhythm. I startled awake to the sound of scratching at the cabin walls. Light at first, then more insistent, like claws or fingernails dragging across the wood. I grabbed the knife and moved to the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. The moon had risen, casting the clearing in silver light. At first I saw nothing, then a shadow moved at the edge of the forest. A large shape too tall to be a natural animal loping toward the cabin on all fours. It reached the edge of the clearing and rose to its full height, easily 7 feet tall, with the general shape of a human but wrong proportions. Its limbs were too long, its back hunched at an unnatural angle. In the moonlight, its skin gleamed like wet leather. Behind it, more shapes emerged from the trees. 3, then 5, then a dozen or more. Some moved like wolves or coyotes but were too large. Others were more humanoid, their movements jerky and disjointed, as if they were wearing bodies that didn't quite fit. They formed a circle around the cabin, just beyond the tree line. Watching, waiting, the scratching resumed, now from multiple directions simultaneously. I moved from window to window, catching glimpses of elongated limbs, of distorted faces pressing against the glass. "Alex!" The voice came from directly outside the door, Kyle's voice again. "Let me in, man. It's freezing out here." I remained silent, clutching the knife. Another voice joined in, a young woman's, trembling with fear. "Please help us. We're lost." "We saw your light." One of the missing hikers, I realized. Or rather, something using her voice. More voices added to the chorus. The professor, the other hikers, former colleagues, even family members I hadn't spoken to in years, all calling my name, all begging to be let in. The juniper branches above the windows began to smolder, giving off a pungent smoke. The protective symbols I'd drawn in ash glowed faintly in the darkness. Whatever Hostine had taught me was working. They couldn't enter uninvited, but they could still try to trick me into inviting them. "Alex, son, open the door." My father's voice, perfect in every inflection. "I came as soon as I heard you were in trouble." My father had been dead for 8 years. "You're not him," I whispered. "Of course I am." The voice grew insistent. "Don't you recognize your own father?" "My father is dead." A pause, then laughter. Not my father's voice anymore, but something ancient and cold. "All fathers die, Ranger. All sons too. Why delay the inevitable? Open the door. Join the hollow chorus." "No." The scratching intensified, joined now by pounding that shook the cabin's frame. The temperature inside plummeted, my breath fogging in the suddenly frigid air. Through the window I watched as one of the creatures, the tallest, with features that seemed to constantly shift and reform, approached the porch. It moved with fluid grace, its form rippling like water. It stopped at the edge of the steps, head tilting as it studied the protective barrier. "Clever Ranger," it said, its voice a discordant blend of all the others. "The old magic protects you for now." I found my voice. "What do you want from me?" "We told you. To taste your fear, to wear your skin, to be you." It gestured to the others surrounding the cabin. "We are many, you are one. The night is long. Others know I'm here. They'll come looking. Let them come." It made a sound like bones grinding together. "The storm approaches. No one will reach you for days." As if summoned by its words, the wind rose suddenly, howling through the trees. Dark clouds obscured the moon, plunging the clearing into deeper darkness. "The old one who gave you these protections," it continued. "He cannot save you. No one can. When your supplies run out, when hunger and thirst weaken your resolve, you will open the door." It placed a hand against the invisible barrier at the threshold. A hand that was sometimes human, sometimes clawed, never quite stable in form. "We can wait," it said. "We have waited centuries for less interesting prey than you, Alex Mercer." It knew my full name. Had I spoken it aloud in the forest? Or had it pulled the knowledge from Kyle's memories? "You won't get in," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Perhaps not tonight." It stepped back from the porch. "But the storm comes. 3 days of darkness, Ranger. 3 days alone with us whispering at your door." The creature rejoined the others at the edge of the clearing. They continued their vigil, occasionally calling out with stolen voices, occasionally scratching at the walls, but they made no further attempts to approach the door. The wind grew stronger, driving the first flakes of snow before it. Within an hour the ground was covered in white. Within 2, visibility beyond the porch had dropped to near zero. The blizzard had arrived, just as headquarters predicted. And with it the promise of days of isolation, with only the skinwalkers for company. I checked my supplies again. 2 days of food if I rationed carefully. Enough firewood for 3. The protective measures seemed to be holding, but how long would they last against determined predators with unknown powers? As the night wore on, the voices continued their psychological assault. Sometimes pleading, sometimes threatening, sometimes simply conversing as if we were old friends catching up. They knew things about me. Childhood memories, private fears, secret shames. Things they could only have gleaned from reading my mind or from some deeper connection I didn't understand. By dawn the storm was in full force, howling wind driving snow against the cabin in blinding sheets. The creatures had retreated from sight, but I could sense their presence in the forest, waiting. I was trapped, unable to leave, running low on supplies, with unknown entities laying siege to my sanctuary. My only hope was that the protective measures would hold until the storm passed and help could arrive. But deep down, I knew the truth. No ordinary help could save me from what lurked in the forest. Whatever these skinwalkers were, whatever they wanted from me, this confrontation had been building since I first arrived at Silo Forest. The long night had ended, but the true darkness was just beginning. Chapter 5. What walks between? The blizzard raged for 2 days without pause, transforming the familiar landscape into an alien wilderness of white. Through occasional breaks in the whiteout conditions, I glimpsed dark shapes moving through the snow, sometimes upright, sometimes on all fours, always keeping the cabin under surveillance. The skinwalkers never left, never seemed to tire. Their voices continued day and night, a constant assault that left me exhausted and jumping at shadows. I slept in short bursts, never more than an hour at a time, the knife always in hand. By the third day, my food was nearly gone. The firewood would last another day at most. The protective measures were holding, but the juniper branches had begun to wither, and the ash symbols needed regular renewal. I spent hours poring over my notes, trying to make sense of everything Hostine had told me. The knife was meant to sever a skinwalker's connection to its stolen form, forcing it back to its original shape. But to use it, I'd have to get close enough to strike, a suicide mission against creatures that could move with inhuman speed. The radio remained silent. The storm had likely knocked out communications across the region. No one was coming to help. On the morning of the 4th day, the storm finally began to abate. The wind died down, and breaks in the clouds allowed wan sunlight to illuminate the transformed forest. Snow drifted against the cabin walls, in some places reaching nearly to the windows. I was gathering the courage to attempt clearing a path to the woodshed when something changed in the atmosphere. The air seemed to thicken, time itself slowing like honey poured from a jar. Outside, the forest had gone completely still. No wind, no movement. Even the snow suspended in mid-air, frozen between heaven and earth. A voice spoke directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. The same consciousness that had addressed me from the coyote thing days earlier. "The time for games is ending, Ranger." I spun around, searching for the source, but saw nothing. "Your protections weaken. Your supplies dwindle. Soon you must choose, open the door willingly, or starve in your sanctuary." "Leave me alone," I said aloud, my voice sounding flat in the strange stillness. "We cannot. You have seen us truly. You have heard our voices. You have dreamed our dreams. You are already part of our world." A chill ran through me at these words. The dreams, those vivid nightmares of pursuit through endless forest, of the cavern with its swaying figures, had felt more like memories than inventions of my sleeping mind. "What are you?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "We are the first hunger. Before your kind walked upright, we hunted in the spaces between worlds. We have worn many skins, spoken with many voices, feasted on many fears. What do you want from me?" "Your essence, your memories, your unique spark." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "But more than that, we want what you represent." "And what's that?" "A bridge, a doorway. You stand with one foot in our world already, Ranger. Your sight gives you power you have not yet grasped." I thought of how I'd sensed their presence from the beginning, how I'd seen through their disguises when others hadn't. "The old one who gave you protections, he knows the truth. Ask him about the 7th generation. Ask him about the child born with the call." Before I could respond, a sharp crack split the unnatural silence. One of the protective symbols I'd drawn on the wall fractured, black lines spreading outward like a shattered mirror. The stillness broke. Wind returned, snow resumed its descent, and time flowed normally again. I rushed to repair the damaged symbol, redrawing it with the dwindling supply of ash. But even as I worked, I sensed the change. The protections were failing, and no amount of renewal would restore their original strength. I had hours at most before the skinwalkers could breach the cabin. With no other options, I made a desperate decision. I had to reach Hostine, to learn what the voice meant about the 7th generation and the child born with the call. Knowledge was my only remaining weapon. I dressed in my warmest clothes, filled a pack with what little food remained, and strapped the knife to my belt. The truck was likely buried in snow, and the roads would be impassable. But I knew these woods. In good conditions, I could hike to the reservation in 6 hours. These were not good conditions. The snow was waist-deep in places, and the temperature had plummeted with the passing of the storm front. But staying meant certain death or worse. Before leaving, I reinforced the protective symbols one last time and placed the remaining ash in a small pouch around my neck. Then, taking a deep breath, I opened the door and stepped into the blinding white world. The cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. I waded through the deep snow, each step a battle, heading southeast toward the reservation. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, no distant sounds of civilization, just the crunch of snow beneath my boots and the rasp of my labored breathing. I'd barely gone 100 yards when I sensed them, presences moving through the forest parallel to my path. Not approaching, just observing, pacing me. Occasionally, I caught glimpses through the trees, dark shapes flowing like water between trunks, never fully visible. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, making the hair on my neck stand on end. "I know you're there," I called out, my voice muffled by the snow-laden air. "Why not attack? Why follow?" No answer came, but I hadn't expected one. They were toying with me, enjoying my struggle, savoring my fear. Hours passed. The short winter day began to wane, shadows lengthening across the pristine snow. I pushed on, though my legs burned and my lungs ached from the cold air. According to my calculations, I was still at least 3 hours from the reservation. 3 hours I didn't have before darkness fell. As the light faded, the skinwalkers grew bolder. They moved closer, no longer hiding their presence. I counted 7 distinct shapes circling me, cutting off potential escape routes, herding me subtly eastward, away from the reservation. I realized too late that I'd been manipulated. They had allowed me to leave the cabin, knowing the wilderness would finish what their voices had started. I was exhausted, freezing, and increasingly disoriented in the uniform white landscape. With the last of the daylight, I spotted a small outcropping of rock ahead. Not shelter exactly, but a defensible position with my back protected. I made for it, stumbling through snow that now reached nearly to my chest in the deeper drifts. As I reached the rocks, the first howl rose behind me. A sound no natural wolf or coyote ever made. A keening wail that started as animal but shifted midway to something disturbingly human. Others joined in, the chorus building to a crescendo that echoed through the forest. The message was clear. The hunt was entering its final phase. I scrambled up the rocks, drawing the knife with numb fingers. The bone handle seemed to pulse with warmth. The symbols etched into the blade glowing faintly in the gathering darkness. The howls stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Then footsteps approached. Deliberate, unhurried, crunching in the snow. A figure emerged from the trees. In the fading light, I recognized Kyle's lanky form, but his movements were wrong. Too fluid, too graceful for his gangly frame. "Alex," he called, smiling with too many teeth. "You left your nice warm cabin. That wasn't very smart." I said nothing, gripping the knife tighter. "You're freezing. Lost. We can help you." He gestured to the darkening forest. "We know these woods better than anyone. We can lead you to shelter." "Stay back," I warned as he took another step toward the rocks. He stopped, head tilting at an unnatural angle. "The old magic can't protect you out here, Ranger. The knife is just a knife without the knowledge to wield it." "Then why don't you come closer?" I challenged. His smile widened impossibly. "Because the game isn't over yet. We want to see what you'll do next." The clever ranger with the second sight. More figures emerged from the trees. Some human-shaped, others animal-like, all moving with that same unsettling fluidity. They formed a loose circle around the outcropping, watching me with gleaming eyes. "You can't keep this up all night," Kyle's form said. "The temperature is dropping. You'll freeze before dawn." He was right. Already my extremities were growing numb and violent shivers racked my body. Even if the skinwalkers didn't attack, the cold would kill me within hours. "Join us willingly," he continued, his voice softening to an almost hypnotic cadence. "It doesn't have to be painful. Those who come willingly retain more of themselves. They remember who they were." "Like you remember, Kyle?" I asked bitterly. Something flickered across his face, a momentary expression of anguish quickly suppressed. I remember enough, the important parts. For an instant, I glimpsed the real Kyle trapped somewhere behind those flat eyes. A frightened man aware of his fate but powerless to escape it. The sight steeled my resolve. I would not end like that. Hollow, used as bait for others. No, I said firmly. I won't join you, not willingly, not ever. The thing wearing Kyle's skin sighed, a strangely human gesture. Then we do this the hard way. It moved with blinding speed, scaling the rocks before I could react. I slashed wildly with the knife, feeling it connect with something solid. A shriek of pain echoed through the clearing, and Kyle's form recoiled, clutching its arm where a deep gash oozed black fluid instead of blood. The wound smoked in the cold air, the edges of the cut glowing with the same light as the symbols on the blade. The creature stared at the injury with something like shock. The old magic, it hissed. Its voice no longer Kyle's, but something ancient and cold, stronger than we thought. I brandished the knife, emboldened by its effect. Come closer and find out how strong. Instead of attacking again, it retreated, rejoining the others at the edge of the clearing. They conferred in low voices, occasionally glancing at me with those gleaming eyes. I used the respite to try to think. The knife had hurt one of them, actually hurt it, not just temporarily disrupted its form. But I couldn't fight them all, especially not in my weakened condition. What had Hostine said about the blade? It severed the connection between a skinwalker and its stolen form, forcing it back to its original shape. But that wasn't enough to destroy them. The sky had darkened completely now, stars emerging in the clear, cold night. The temperature continued to drop and my shivers had evolved into violent tremors. I wouldn't last much longer. As if sensing my failing strength, the skinwalkers began to move closer again, tightening their circle around the rocks. This time, they approached as a group, not giving me a single target to focus on. In desperation, I cut my palm with the knife and let the blood drip onto the blade. The symbols flared brilliantly, illuminating the clearing with otherworldly light. The skinwalkers recoiled, hissing and snarling. The light seemed to pain them, forcing them back several paces. Acting on instinct, I raised the bloodied knife and spoke the words Hostine had taught me, ancient Navajo syllables that felt like fire on my tongue. The world shifted. The forest around me seemed to blur and distort, as if viewed through rippling water. The skinwalkers' forms became even less stable, flickering between human, animal, and something utterly alien. A rift appeared in the air before me. Not a physical tear, but a distortion in reality itself. Through it, I glimpsed another place. A vast cavern illuminated by phosphorescent fungi, where dozens of hollow-eyed figures swayed in synchronous movement. The missing hikers, the professor, and other victims I didn't recognize, all trapped in some kind of trance, their essences feeding whatever force animated the skinwalkers. And deeper in the cavern, something ancient and vast stirred. A presence so alien my mind couldn't process its true form, perceiving only fragments, obsidian eyes, membranous wings, a hunger older than humanity. The sight drove me to my knees, the knife slipping from my nerveless fingers. The rift began to widen, the boundary between worlds thinning. One of the skinwalkers, the tallest, its form constantly shifting, approached the rift from the other side. It reached through, elongated fingers stretching toward me. The bridge opens, it said directly into my mind. Come, child of the 7th generation, your place is prepared. With my last coherent thought, I lunged for the fallen knife. My bloodied hand closed around the bone handle, and I thrust the blade into the reaching hand. Light exploded outward, blinding in its intensity. The skinwalker shrieked, a sound that contained all the voices it had stolen, all the pain it had caused, all the hunger it had never satisfied. The rift collapsed, reality snapping back into place with such force that I was thrown backward against the rocks. Darkness descended, but not before I glimpsed the skinwalkers fleeing into the forest, their forms disintegrating like smoke in a high wind. I lay there, barely conscious, as snow began to fall again. The cold embraced me, and I no longer had the strength to fight it. As my eyes drifted closed, I thought I heard the distant sound of voices, human voices, calling my name. But I'd heard that trick before, and I wasn't falling for it again. I woke to warmth and the smell of burning sage. For a moment I lay disoriented, certain I had died in the snow. Then the pain hit. Deep, aching cold in my extremities, sharp stabs in my frost-nipped face. I was alive, my eyes open to a small room I didn't recognize. Navajo blankets covered the walls and a fire burned in a small stove nearby. I was wrapped in layers of blankets, with heated stones placed strategically around my body. "He wakes," a familiar voice said. Hostein's weathered face appeared above me, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "How?" My voice was a croak. "We found you in the snow," he said simply, 3 miles from the reservation boundary. "You were nearly gone." Memory flooded back. The skinwalkers, the knife, the rift between worlds. I tried to sit up but fell back, too weak to manage it. "The knife," I said urgently. "Where is it?" "Safe." Hostein gestured to a shelf where the bone-handled blade rested, wrapped partially in red cloth. "It served you well." "What happened?" "The skinwalkers. Gone, for now." He adjusted one of the hot stones near my feet. "You opened a door they did not expect. You glimpsed their true domain and survived. Few have done so." I saw something in a cavern. People swaying, and deeper inside. "Do not speak of it," he interrupted sharply. "Names have power, even descriptions. What you saw was never meant for human eyes." I fell silent, processing everything that had happened. After a moment I asked, "What did they mean about the 7th generation? About being born with the call?" Haustein sighed heavily, settling onto a chair beside the bed. "There is a prophecy among my people. Every 7th generation a child is born with the call, the birth membrane covering the face. Such children can see between worlds. They are bridges, doorways that the hollow ones seek to use. And I'm one of these children? Your mother or grandmother must have been Navajo, though perhaps you did not know it." He studied my face. "The blood remembers even when the mind forgets." I thought of my grandmother who had died when I was young. She had been adopted, her origins unknown. Could she have been Navajo? "The skinwalkers sense this in you," Hosteen continued. "They have been seeking one like you for many generations. A doorway they could control, could use to bring more of their kind into our world. But I stopped them, for now." His expression grew grave. "But they are patient hunters. They will wait, gather strength, try again. What can I do? I can't live in fear of them forever." Hosteen was silent for a long moment. "There are ways to seal your sight, to close the door within you. But it comes at a cost. You would lose a part of yourself, the part that sees truly." I considered this. To never again sense the watching eyes in the forest. To never know when something wasn't what it appeared to be. It would be safer, certainly. But would I still be me? "There is another path," Hosteen said, seeming to read my thoughts. "You could learn to use your sight, to strengthen it, to fight them on their own ground." "Is that even possible?" "Difficult, dangerous. Few have attempted it and remained whole." He gestured to the knife. "But you have already shown greater strength than most." The knife responded to you, open to your blood. "That is rare." Outside the wind howled, a natural sound, not the keening wail of the skinwalkers, but eerie nonetheless. The storm had returned, isolating us in this small sanctuary of warmth and light. "You need not decide now," Hosteen said, rising. "Rest, heal. When you are stronger, we will speak again." He moved to the door but paused, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "The Hollow Ones named you truly, Ranger. You are a bridge between worlds. The question is, what will you allow to cross?" With that, he left me to my thoughts and the howling of the wind outside. A wind that just perhaps carried voices only I could truly hear. In the weeks that followed, as I recovered from my ordeal, I made my decision. I would not seal my sight, would not close the door within me. Instead, I would learn from Hosteen and others like him. I would strengthen my abilities, understand the ancient enemy that had marked me. I requested permanent assignment at Siley Forest, despite headquarters' concerns about my accident in the blizzard. Some battles can only be fought on familiar ground. The skinwalkers are still out there, watching from the shadows between worlds. Sometimes at night, I hear their voices calling from the darkness. familiar tones promising warmth, safety, reunion. I keep the knife close. I renew the protective symbols regularly. I learn the old ways, the old words, the old magics, and I wait. For the hollow ones are patient hunters, and so too must be those who stand against them. The bridge remains open, but now I guard the crossing. I never wanted to be the kind of ranger who had stories. In my line of work, stories meant trouble, meant something had gone wrong in the wilderness I was sworn to protect. But the Nehemana Forest doesn't care what you want. Named after an ancient word meaning mystic according to the locals, this remote stretch of woodland at the northernmost edge of Montana has its own plans for those who walk beneath its ancient pines. My name is Alex Mercer, and for the past 7 years I've served as the senior ranger at Nehemana Forest Reserve. Most days consisted of trail maintenance, wildlife monitoring, and occasionally helping lost hikers find their way back to civilization. The forest was my office, my sanctuary, and my home. The trouble began 3 weeks ago when a group of campers failed to check out. Standard procedure. I radioed my position to dispatch and headed to their last known location, Blackwater Lake, a pristine body of water nestled in the shadow of the mountain range. The late October air carried the first hints of winter, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. I parked my truck at the trailhead and began the 5-mile hike to their campsite. Something felt off from the beginning. The forest was too quiet. No birdsong, no rustling in the underbrush, just the sound of my boots crunching over fallen leaves and the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. Their campsite looked abandoned in a hurry. A tent remained partially collapsed, sleeping bags still inside. Their cooking equipment was scattered around a long, cold fire pit. What caught my attention wasn't what was there, but what wasn't. No backpacks, no personal items, no sign of where they might have gone. I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. "Park Service, anyone here?" Nothing. As I moved around the site looking for clues, I noticed something strange. Footprints leading away from the camp, but they weren't human. They resembled deer tracks at first glance, but something was wrong with them. The spacing was off, wider than a deer would leave, and occasionally the impression shifted, becoming almost human before returning to hoofprints. I spent my adult life in these woods. I know every animal that calls this place home, and the tracks they leave. These were wrong. Night falls quickly in the mountains, especially in autumn. I had maybe an hour of daylight left, not enough time to follow the tracks and return safely. Protocol dictated I return to my cabin, report the missing campers, and organize a proper search party in the morning. As I hiked back to my truck, the silence of the forest pressed in around me. No crickets chirped, no owls called. Just the sound of my increasingly hurried footsteps and ragged breathing. I felt watched. Every few minutes I'd turn, scanning the forest behind me, but never saw anything except shadows growing longer as the sun slipped behind the mountains. My cabin sits on the edge of the ranger station compound, separated from the main buildings by a stand of pine trees. It's small but comfortable. 1 bedroom, a modest kitchen/living area, and a front porch where I drink my coffee and watch the sunrise most mornings. That night I radioed in my report, requested a search team for the morning, and tried to shake the unease that had followed me from the lake. I've never been one to scare easily. You can't do this job if you're afraid of the dark or what might be in it. But something about those tracks, about the absolute silence of the woods, had gotten under my skin. I was making dinner when I heard it. A soft scratching at my window. I froze, spatula in hand, and listened. There it was again, like branches scraping against glass. Except there were no trees close enough to touch my cabin. I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The security light illuminated my front yard and the edge of the trees beyond. Nothing moved in the artificial glow, but just beyond it, where the light faded into shadow, I caught a glimpse of something watching me. Not animal, not human, but somehow both. A tall, gaunt figure standing impossibly still. I blinked and it was gone. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept my service pistol on the nightstand, something I'd never felt the need to do before. Every creak of the cabin settling, every whisper of wind made me tense. The search team arrived at dawn. 2 rangers from neighboring districts and a local sheriff's deputy. We split up to cover more ground, with plans to meet back at Blackwater Lake by midday. I took the eastern shore, following those strange tracks I'd found the day before. They led deeper into the woods, away from established trails, into areas rarely visited even by experienced hikers. The forest grew denser, older. Moss-covered trees blocked out much of the morning light, creating a perpetual twilight beneath their branches. The track stopped at the entrance to a narrow ravine. I almost missed it, a small opening between two rock faces, barely wide enough for a person to slip through. It wasn't on any of my maps. In 7 years of patrolling these woods, I'd never noticed it before. I should have waited for the others. I should have marked the location and returned with backup. But something pulled me forward. Curiosity, duty, or something else I couldn't name. The ravine opened into a small clearing, perfectly circular as if carved deliberately into the forest. In the center stood a crude structure. Not quite a cabin, not quite a tent, but something in between, built of branches and animal hides stretched over a frame of weathered wood. The air felt different here, heavier, charged with something I couldn't explain. My radio emitted nothing but static. I was about to retreat to find the others when I saw them, belongings from the missing campers scattered around the structure. A backpack, a camera, a bright red jacket I recognized from the description in their camping permit. I approached cautiously, calling out again. "Park Service, anyone here?" The response wasn't a voice, but a smell. Copper and rot washing over me in a wave so powerful I staggered back. Something dark and viscous had seeped into the ground around the structure. I drew my pistol and approached the entrance, a flap of hide that hung loosely from the top of the frame. With my free hand, I pushed it aside. The interior was empty except for strange symbols drawn on the ground and what looked horribly like dried blood. And a single item in the center, a carved wooden mask with antlers attached to the top. Not museum quality, not a historical artifact, but something newly made. The antlers weren't attached naturally. They'd been bound to the mask with sinew and wire. As I stared at it, I could have sworn the empty eye holes blinked. I backed away, nearly tripping in my haste to exit the structure. As I turned to leave the clearing, I saw it again. The figure from the previous night, standing at the entrance to the ravine, tall and thin, its proportions all wrong, like a human body stretched on a rack. It wore what looked like animal skins, and though I couldn't make out its face clearly, I felt its eyes fixed on me. Neither of us moved for what felt like minutes but must have been seconds. Then it tilted its head, the motion too fluid, too wrong, and stepped sideways behind a tree not nearly wide enough to conceal it. It was gone. I ran, dignity and training forgotten in the need to put distance between myself and whatever I'd seen. I didn't stop until I reached the lake shore, where I found the rest of the search team looking concerned about my absence. I told them about the ravine, about the structure and the campers' belongings. I didn't mention the figure. Even in my panicked state, I knew how it would sound. We returned to the clearing together, but the structure was gone. Not dismantled, gone as if it had never been there. The ground showed no sign of disturbance, no indication that anything had stood in that spot just hours before. The campers' belongings had vanished too. The others looked at me with barely concealed skepticism. The deputy suggested stress and lack of sleep might be affecting my judgment. One of the rangers recommended I take some time off. They were wrong. I wasn't imagining things. And as we made our way back to the trailhead in silence, I knew with absolute certainty that something was in these woods, something that wasn't supposed to be here, something that wore skins not its own, and somehow, it knew my name. 2 days passed before the next incident. 2 days of doubting my own senses, of jumping at shadows and checking my windows at every unfamiliar sound. The search for the missing campers continued without me. My supervisor suggested I take a week of accumulated leave, citing concern over my agitated state. I didn't argue. I knew what I'd seen, but I also knew how it sounded. The thing about living alone in the wilderness is that you get used to silence. You learn to distinguish between the normal quiet of the forest and the unnatural stillness that precedes danger. That second night, the silence woke me from a fitful sleep, the absolute absence of sound, as if the world outside my cabin was holding its breath. I lay motionless in bed, straining to hear anything. Wind, insects, the distant call of a night bird. Nothing. Just the sound of my heart pounding in my ears and the faint creak of floorboards as the cabin settled. Then came the footsteps on my porch. Slow, deliberate steps that didn't match any human gait I'd ever heard. Too many of them somehow, as if whatever walked out there had more than two legs, or moved in a way human legs weren't meant to move. They circled the cabin once, twice, pausing at each window. I remained frozen in bed, the service pistol clutched in my hand so tightly my knuckles ached. Then came the scratching, not at the window this time, but at the door. Long, slow drags of something sharp against wood. I've faced down injured bears, confronted armed poachers, and rescued climbers from precarious cliffs. Never had I felt fear like this. Primal, paralyzing fear that turned my blood to ice water and my muscles to stone. The scratching stopped. In its place came a voice, or something approximating a voice. It sounded like wind through dead leaves, like stones grinding together. "Ranger," it whispered. My title stretched into something unrecognizable. "I know you saw." I found myself moving toward the door, drawn by some compulsion I couldn't name. My hand reached for the knob, then froze as rationality reasserted itself. Whatever stood on the other side of that door wasn't human, wasn't natural. "The forest has secrets," the voice continued. "You weren't supposed to find them, but now you have. What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. Silence stretched for so long I thought it might have left. Then, what all hunters want. The chase. The security light outside flickered and died. In the sudden darkness I heard it move away from the door, its strange gait carrying it off the porch and into the night. Only when the first hints of dawn lightened the sky did I finally lower my gun and sink shakily onto the edge of the bed. In the morning light, I examined my front door. Long, deep gouges marred the wood, too high for any natural animal to reach. They formed no pattern I recognized. Nothing that resembled words or symbols, just violent slashes as if made in anger, or as a promise. I needed answers. The local library maintained an archive of regional history, including documentation of indigenous folklore and settler accounts. If something unnatural was stalking the Nahimana forest, perhaps there were historical precedents, stories that might give me insight into what I was facing. The librarian, a woman named Maggie who'd held her position for nearly 40 years, regarded me with concern when I explained what I was researching. She'd known me since I'd taken the ranger position 7 years ago, had always found me level-headed and practical. "Skinwalker stories?" she asked, her voice lowered despite the empty library. "That's not like you, Alex. Just following up on some stories I've heard from hikers," I lied. "Probably nothing to it, but I like to be thorough." She didn't look convinced, but led me to a section of carefully preserved historical documents. The Nahimana region was primarily Blackfoot territory, but there was some overlap with other tribes. Most of what we have are settler accounts, translations of stories they heard, not exactly primary sources. I spent hours poring over yellowed papers and fragile journals. Most accounts were predictably ethnocentric, the observations of white settlers who barely understood the cultures they encountered. But certain descriptions caught my attention. Reports of skin changers in the deep woods, creatures that mimicked human form but moved wrong, spoke wrong. One journal, written by a trapper in 1879, described an encounter with what he called the hollow people, beings that wore the skins of animals but walked like men, that could speak in voices stolen from their victims. The trapper wrote that these creatures targeted those who ventured too far into certain parts of the forest, especially near water sources considered sacred. Blackwater Lake. The trapper's final entry contained a crude map marking areas to avoid. Though landmarks had changed over nearly 150 years, one location stood out. A circular clearing near a ravine, almost exactly where I'd found that strange structure. As I closed the journal, Maggie approached with another, newer book. "Found this in the local history section," she said. "Thought it might interest you." The book, published in the 1970s, documented a series of disappearances in the Nahimana region between 1965 and 1972. 11 people vanished without trace, all within a 5-mile radius of Blackwater Lake. The author, a journalist named Robert Mason, had attempted to connect these disappearances to similar incidents dating back to the earliest European presence in the area. The pattern was unmistakable. Every 40 to 50 years, people went missing in these woods. Not in large numbers, not enough to draw national attention, but consistently enough to form a pattern if you knew to look for it. The most recent cluster had occurred in the early 2000s, just before I'd taken the ranger position. 4 hikers, 3 hunters, and a geological surveyor, all gone without explanation. I checked the book out, along with copies of the trapper's journal pages. As I was leaving, Maggie called after me. "Alex, be careful out there. These mountains, they keep their secrets close." I drove back to my cabin as the sun began to set, the book beside me on the passenger seat. I'd requested and received another week of leave, ostensibly to rest and recover. In reality, I planned to continue my investigation privately. If the historical pattern held true, more people would go missing. I couldn't let that happen, not in the forest under my protection. The cabin felt different when I returned, colder, unwelcoming. I checked every room, gun drawn, before finally convincing myself I was alone. Yet the sensation of being watched persisted, as if the very walls had eyes. I spent the evening reading Mason's book, tracking the patterns of disappearances, noting the similarities across decades. Most victims were alone or had become separated from their groups. Many reported strange experiences before vanishing. Voices in the woods, animals behaving oddly, the sensation of being followed. Around midnight, I stepped onto my porch to clear my head. The night was unnaturally quiet again, the stars obscured by clouds that promised rain by morning. As I turned to go back inside, movement at the forest's edge caught my eye. A security light, now functioning again, cast just enough illumination to see a figure standing between 2 pines. Not the gaunt, wrong-proportioned shape from before, but a deer, a large buck with an impressive rack of antlers. It stood perfectly still, watching my cabin. No deer would stand so boldly in the light, so close to human habitation. No deer would stare with such focused intensity. I raised my hand slowly, and the deer mimicked the gesture, its front leg bending in ways no serving limb should move. Then it smiled, its muzzle splitting horizontally to reveal teeth that belonged in no herbivore's mouth. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then systematically locked every window in the cabin, drawing blinds and curtains against the night. The radio crackled with static when I tried to call for backup. The landline phone emitted nothing but a dead tone. Even my cell phone showed no service. Not unusual in these remote mountains, but the timing felt deliberate. I was alone with whatever hunted in these woods. Whatever had been hunting here for generations. Sleep was impossible. I sat in my living room with my back to the wall, gun in hand, listening to the sounds of something circling my cabin throughout the night. Not the deer. It moved differently now, heavier, its footfalls those of something much larger. Occasionally, it would pause outside a window and tap gently on the glass with what sounded like claws. Once it whispered my name in a perfect imitation of Maggie's voice. Another time, it mimicked the radio chatter of my fellow rangers calling for help, claiming to be injured just beyond my door. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I waited for dawn with the desperate hope of all prey animals that have nowhere left to run. Morning came with rain, heavy drops pounding on the roof and streaming down the windows. No sign remained of my nighttime visitor except a single antler tine stuck into my front door like a warning, or an invitation. I pulled it free, examining it in the gray morning light. Fresh, not shed naturally but broken off, or removed deliberately. The base showed not the clean break of a dropped antler but jagged edges as if torn from the animal's head with great force, or as if someone had removed it from their own head. The rain continued all day, alternating between gentle drizzle and pounding downpour. I used the time to formulate a plan. Whatever this thing was, skinwalker, wendigo, or something with no name in any human language, it was tied to specific locations in the forest. The trapper's map, though old, gave me a starting point. If I couldn't defeat this thing, perhaps I could understand it. Perhaps I could stop it before more people vanished into the hungry darkness of Nahimana Forest. I would return to Blackwater Lake at dawn. Not as prey, but as hunter. The rain stopped just before sunrise, leaving the forest dripping and heavy with moisture. Mist clung to the ground and wound between the trees like spectral fingers as I made my way back toward Blackwater Lake. I'd left my truck at the trailhead, opting to approach on foot, quieter, less noticeable. I came prepared this time. My pack contained not just standard ranger gear but items gathered based on my research. Iron nails, sage bundles, salt, folklore remedies against supernatural threats. I felt foolish including them, but foolish seemed preferable to dead. My service pistol rode on my hip, along with a hunting knife. In my hands I carried a shotgun, not standard issue for park rangers but my own personal weapon brought from home. If the thing in the woods came for me again, I wanted more stopping power than my 9mm could provide. The hike to the lake normally took 2 hours. That morning it took nearly 4. I moved cautiously, stopping often to listen, to scan my surroundings. The forest felt different. The familiar landscape transformed into something alien and threatening. Birds called warnings to each other as I passed. A fox crossed my path, froze upon seeing me, then bolted as if fleeing something far more dangerous than a human. The abandoned campsite had been officially processed by the search team days earlier, the remaining equipment cataloged and removed. Nothing remained except flattened grass and the stone circle of the fire pit. I paused there briefly, then continued toward the ravine where I'd found the strange structure. The entrance was exactly as I remembered, a narrow gap between rock faces, easily missed if you weren't looking for it. What had changed was the feeling it evoked. Before, I'd felt curiosity, perhaps unease. Now, standing before that dark opening, I felt naked terror trying to claw its way up my throat. Something didn't want me to enter. Some primal part of my brain screamed danger, urged me to run, to flee back to safety and light. I forced myself forward, squeezing through the gap, emerging once more into that perfectly circular clearing. The structure was gone, as I discovered with the search team. But in daylight, with focused attention, I noticed details I'd missed before. The ground in the center of the clearing was different, the soil darker, almost black compared to the surrounding earth. No plants grew in that circular patch, not even the hardy mountain grasses that thrived everywhere else. I knelt, removing a glove to touch the soil. It felt wrong, too cold, slightly oily. I withdrew my hand quickly, wiping it clean on my pants leg. The trees surrounding the clearing bore marks, symbols carved into their bark at irregular intervals. Not random vandalism, but deliberate patterns repeated with minor variations. Some looked fresh, others weathered by years of exposure. I photographed each marking, making notes of their positions relative to the clearing. As I worked, the forest grew quieter around me, the morning birdsong fading until only the sound of dripping water remained. I was being watched again. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, the ravine entrance, the patches of underbrush. Nothing moved, yet the sensation of eyes upon me intensified until it felt like a physical weight pressing against my skin. "I know you're there," I called, voice steady despite the fear churning in my gut. "I know what you've been doing in these woods." No response came except the echo of my own voice bouncing back from the rock walls. I continued. "The missing campers, the hunters and hikers before them, how many have you taken? How many skins have you worn?" Movement flashed at the corner of my vision, gone when I turned to face it. A branch cracked somewhere to my left. Behind me something disturbed the underbrush. It was circling me, staying just out of sight. I raised the shotgun, turning slowly to track the sounds. "Show yourself." The laughter that answered came from everywhere and nowhere, a sound like stones sliding against each other, like bones breaking. It surrounded me, emanating from the trees themselves, from the ground beneath my feet, from the very air. "Brave Ranger," the voice said, the same unnatural voice that had spoken outside my cabin. "You understand nothing." "Then help me understand," I replied, fighting to keep my voice level. "Why these people? Why this place?" "This place is mine," it said. "Has always been mine. Will always be mine. Those who trespass too deeply become mine as well." "The forest belongs to everyone," I argued, aware even as I spoke of how hollow the words sounded. "These are public lands." The laughter came again, harsher this time. "Public, private, human words for human concepts. This place was mine before your kind learned to speak, before you learned to walk upright, before you learned to fear the dark." A figure stepped from behind a tree directly ahead of me. The deer from the previous night, still walking on two legs, its front limbs now more clearly arms ending in hands with two long fingers. Its head remained that of a buck, but the eyes that fixed on me held nothing of animal nature. They were calculating, ancient, and unmistakably intelligent. I raised the shotgun, aiming at its chest. "Stay back." The deer thing tilted its head, antlers catching what little light filtered through the canopy. "You cannot harm me with that. Not here, not in my place." "Silver buckshot," I lied. Iron filings mixed in. It made a sound that might have been amusement. Stories, human stories to make the darkness less frightening. I am not vampire, not werewolf, not ghost. I am older than your myths. It took a step forward. I fired. The blast echoed through the clearing, impossibly loud in the unnatural silence. The deer thing staggered backward, dark fluid leaking from its chest, not blood, something thicker, almost black. For a moment triumph surged through me, then it straightened, regarding the wound with what looked like curiosity. Before my eyes, the injury began to close, the dark fluid receding back into its body like a film played in reverse. "Now it's my turn," it said. It moved faster than anything should move, crossing the clearing in a blur. I fired again, the shot going wide as I stumbled backward. Before I could chamber another round, it was upon me, knocking the shotgun from my hands with one powerful swipe. I drew my pistol, managed to fire twice before it knocked that weapon away as well. I pulled my knife, slashing desperately as it drove me to the ground. Up close, the wrongness of it was overwhelming. Its body seemed to shift constantly, the deer aspects flowing into something more human than into something entirely other. The antlers writhed like living things. The mouth that had split into a smile now opened wider than any jaw should allow, revealing rows of teeth that extended down its throat. "I could take your skin now," it said, its voice grating against my ears like broken glass. "Wear your face, walk among your kind. But that would be too easy." Its weight pinned me to the ground, one clawed hand pressing against my chest hard enough to make breathing difficult. With its other hand, it reached toward my face, one long finger tracing a line from my forehead to my chin. "I prefer the chase," it continued. "The fear, the knowing. Watching you try to warn others, watching them doubt you, watching you question your own mind." The pressure on my chest increased until spots danced at the edges of my vision. Just as darkness began to close in, it released me, stepping back with that same unnatural speed. I gasped for air, rolling onto my side, every instinct screaming at me to run. But my body wouldn't respond, limbs heavy and uncooperative as if I'd been drugged. The creature circled me slowly, its form shifting with each step. One moment it wore the deer's head, the next a wolf's, then something with too many eyes and no features I could name. "3 days," it said. "3 days I will hunt you. If you survive, perhaps you earn the right to this forest. If not," it gestured to itself, to its constantly changing form, "you join the others." It leaned close, its breath hot against my ear, smelling of rot and copper and something ancient. "Run, Ranger, run far, run well. When the moon is full, I come for you." Then it was gone, melting into the trees as if it had never been there. I lay on the ground, struggling to breathe, to move, to process what had happened. Minutes or hours passed before I managed to sit up, to retrieve my weapons with shaking hands. The clearing looked undisturbed. No sign of our struggle, no blood on the ground where the creature had been shot. Only my own ragged breathing and pounding heart confirmed that the encounter had been real and not some hallucination. The journey back to my cabin passed in a blur of paranoia and adrenaline. Every shadow held threat, every sound signaled pursuit. I expected to feel claws on my back at any moment, to hear that terrible voice whispering my name again, but I made it back unmolested as the sun began to set. My cabin offered little comfort now. I knew firsthand how easily the creature could find me there. Still, it represented my best chance at survival. I had supplies there, weapons, communication equipment that might start working again. 3 days until the full moon. 3 days to prepare, to plan, to find some way to fight a creature that bullets couldn't stop. As I approached my cabin, I noticed something hanging from my porch railing, a small leather pouch tied with sinew. I approached cautiously, examining it without touching. Similar pouches had been documented in the historical accounts I'd read, warnings left by indigenous peoples marking boundaries not to be crossed, or territories claimed by something not human. I used a stick to nudge it, half expecting it to explode or release something dangerous. It merely swung gently on its cord. Finally, using gloves, I untied it and carefully opened the weathered leather. Inside lay human teeth, at least a dozen, some clearly adult, others smaller, from children. A warning, a trophy collection, or both. I retched, dropping the pouch, stumbling backward down the porch steps. The creature was showing me the fate of those it had taken, showing me what awaited if I failed its twisted test. Night fell as I secured my cabin. Windows and doors locked and barricaded, salt lines laid across thresholds. Foolish, perhaps, but I was beyond caring about feeling foolish. I tried the radio again, and to my surprise, it crackled to life. I called dispatch, requested immediate evacuation for a medical emergency. Myself, symptoms suggesting a severe concussion from a fall. The truth would get me nowhere. A medical emergency would bring help without questions, would get me out of these mountains before the creature's deadline arrived. "Understood, Ranger Mercer," came the response. "Medical evac at first light. Sit tight." I signed off, relief washing through me. Just one night to survive, then I'd be away from here, away from the hunting grounds of whatever ancient horror had claimed Nahimana Forest as its territory. As darkness deepened outside my windows, I heard it again, that now familiar footfall circling my cabin. Not approaching, not testing doors or windows, just circling, reminding me of its presence, reminding me that regardless of my plans, it would be watching, waiting, hunting. The 3-day countdown had begun. The medical evacuation team arrived shortly after dawn, a Park Service helicopter touching down in the clearing near the ranger station. I'd spent the night alternating between fitful sleep and anxious vigilance, the creature's presence a constant weight pressing against the walls of my cabin. It never tried to enter, never spoke again, content simply to remind me of its proximity, of its patience. The paramedics found me pale and shaky, symptoms they attributed to the concussion I'd fabricated. In truth, exhaustion and fear had taken their toll. I allowed them to strap me to a backboard, to load me into the helicopter, relief washing over me as we lifted off, the forest falling away beneath us. From the air, Nahimana looked peaceful, beautiful, ancient conifers stretching to the horizon, morning mist clinging to valleys, Blackwater Lake a perfect mirror reflecting the cloudless sky. Nothing from this height suggested the horror that walked beneath those trees. We landed at County General Hospital 2 hours later. The doctors found no evidence of concussion, but my elevated heart rate, blood pressure, and obvious distress prompted them to keep me for observation. Possible anxiety attack, the chart read. Stress-related symptoms. I didn't argue. A hospital bed surrounded by people felt infinitely safer than my isolated cabin. I gave vague answers to questions about what had happened in the forest, claiming I'd fallen while investigating the missing camper's case, hit my head, become disoriented and afraid. No one questioned my story. Why would they? Rangers sometimes got injured in the line of duty. The human mind played tricks when concussed, when alone in the wilderness. Everyone knew that. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in days, lulled by exhaustion and the constant beep of monitoring equipment. The reassuring sounds of nurses moving in the hallway outside my room. I woke to darkness and silence. The monitoring equipment had been turned off. The hospital sounds had ceased. Moonlight streamed through the window, nearly full, 1 day closer to the deadline. Something stood at the foot of my bed, not the deer thing from the forest, but a nurse, or what appeared to be a nurse at first glance. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw the wrongness in her stance, the unnatural angle of her head, the 2 long fingers that gripped the footboard. "Did you think distance would save you?" she asked in that terrible grinding voice. "Did you think walls would keep me out? I go where I please, Ranger. I wear what face I choose." I lunged for the call button, but my limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. Sleep paralysis, I told myself desperately. Just a nightmare, not real. The nurse thing moved to the side of the bed, its movements jerky, puppet-like. Up close, its face looked wrong. The features slightly misaligned, as if whoever had constructed this disguise didn't quite understand how human faces worked. 2 days remain, it said. Then the hunt begins in earnest. What are you? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. It tilted its head at an impossible angle. I am hunger. I am loneliness. I am the shadow between worlds. The people you've taken, are they dead? A sound emerged that might have been laughter. Dead. Alive. Such limited concepts. They are transformed. Parts of them live in me now. Parts of them live in the spaces between your world and mine. It leaned closer, and I caught that familiar scent of copper and rot. They scream sometimes. Would you like to hear? Before I could respond, it opened its mouth wider, impossibly wider, the jaw distending until the lower half of its face seemed to split apart. From that cavernous opening came voices, dozens of overlapping voices pleading, crying, calling for help. I recognized some from the missing persons reports. The campers, a backpacker who'd vanished the previous summer. Others I couldn't identify. I closed my eyes, tried to block out the sound, but it penetrated directly into my brain, bypassing my ears entirely. The voices rose to a crescendo of agony, then cut off abruptly as the creature closed its mouth. Still want to save them, Ranger? Still want to be the hero? I opened my eyes to find it gone. The room had returned to normal. Monitors beeping steadily, hallway sounds filtering through the closed door. But on the pillow beside my head lay a single human tooth, worn and yellowed with age. Not a dream, not a hallucination. I checked myself out of the hospital against medical advice the next morning. The doctors protested but couldn't legally keep me there. I took a taxi back to the ranger station, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. The creature had made its rules clear. 3 days until the hunt began in earnest. It could have killed me already. In the clearing, at my cabin, in the hospital. But it chose not to. It wanted the chase, the fear, the game of it all. If I couldn't escape it, perhaps I could fight it on its own terms. Perhaps I could set a trap. My supervisor was surprised to see me return, concerned about my condition. I assured him I was fine, that I needed to tie up loose ends on the missing campers case before taking extended leave. He didn't look convinced, but didn't stop me either. I spent the day gathering supplies. Emergency flares, gasoline, hunting equipment from my personal collection, items mentioned in the folklore accounts as having power against skin changers, iron, silver, certain herbs. I didn't know what would work, if anything would work, but I had to try. The second night passed at the ranger station rather than my cabin. I didn't sleep. I sat in the communications office, shotgun across my lap, monitoring the radio, researching on the ancient desktop computer. Outside, rain began to fall again, drumming against the metal roof. Around midnight, the radio crackled to life. Not an incoming transmission, just static that rose and fell in patterns that almost resembled speech. I leaned closer, straining to understand. Come home? I thought I heard within the white noise. Waiting for you. The lights flickered, then stabilized. On the window across from my desk, condensation formed not in random patterns but in deliberate strokes, spelling out words that disappeared almost as quickly as they formed. I see you. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath fogged in front of my face. The radio static grew louder, resolving more clearly into words. Come to the lake, come to the water. All is forgiven if you come willingly. I grabbed the shotgun, moving away from the window, from the radio. Leave me alone. You said 3 days. I said the hunt begins in earnest then, the voice replied, now perfectly clear through the speaker. The game has already started. The door to the communications room swung open slowly, revealing not the hallway beyond, but Blackwater Lake at night, its surface black and still beneath the nearly full moon. Impossible. The door couldn't open to a location miles away, yet there it was. At the lake's edge stood a figure, not the deer thing or the false nurse, but a perfect copy of myself, watching me with eyes that reflected the moonlight like an animal's. Come join us, my doppelganger called, its voice my own yet underlined with that stone-grinding quality. It's peaceful here, no more fear, no more doubt. I raised the shotgun, fired through the doorway. The buckshot passed through the vision of the lake, through my double, rippling the image like a stone thrown into water. The doorway shimmered, then returned to normal, showing only the darkened hallway of the ranger station. I slammed the door shut, barricaded it with a desk. The radio had gone silent. The temperature slowly returned to normal. I huddled in the corner until dawn, the shotgun never leaving my hands. With the first light of day came clarity. I couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding. The creature would find me wherever I went. It would wear whatever face it needed to get close. Distance and walls wouldn't protect me. I had to face it on its own ground. Had to bring the fight to it. The final day before the deadline, I returned to Blackwater Lake. Not to the ravine this time, but to the lake itself. The heart of the creature's territory according to the historical accounts, the place where it was strongest. I set up camp on the shore, building a fire larger than necessary, making my presence obvious. If it wanted to find me, I would make the task simple. I arranged my weapons and tools within easy reach: the shotgun, my service pistol, a hunting rifle, flares, gasoline, matches, salt, iron nails, silver coins melted down and shaped into crude bullets. As the sun began to set on the final day, I felt strangely calm. Fear had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold determination. I would not be this thing's prey. I would not join the voices trapped within it. I would fight, and if I died, I would die facing it, not running from it. Darkness fell. The moon rose, full and bright, illuminating the lake and surrounding forest with silvery light. The water remained perfectly still, not a ripple disturbing its glassy surface despite the light breeze that stirred the trees. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Still I waited, alert and watchful, feeding the fire, scanning the tree line, the water's edge. Just before dawn, when the eastern sky had begun to lighten faintly, the lake's surface broke. Something emerged from the water. Not with a splash, but silently, water sheeting off its form as it rose. It walked toward shore with that now familiar wrong gait, its shape shifting and flowing with each step. By the time it reached the beach, it had settled into a form I hadn't seen before. Humanoid but too tall, too thin, its limbs elongated and jointed in extra places. Its skin was pale and seemed to absorb rather than reflect the moonlight. Its face was featureless except for dark hollows where eyes should be and a vertical slash of a mouth. "The hunt begins," it said simply. I raised the shotgun, loaded with the silver shot. "It ends here." It tilted its head, regarding me with those eyeless sockets. "Brave, foolish, but brave." "I know what you are," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I've studied the records, the history. You're ancient, but not invincible. Others have fought you before." "Fought, died, joined," it replied. "As all do eventually." "Not me," I said, and fired. The silver shot tore through its torso, leaving ragged holes that leaked that same dark fluid I'd seen before. It staggered but didn't fall. Before my eyes, the wounds began to close, but slower than before, the silver having some effect, however minimal. I fired again, reloading with shaking hands as it advanced steadily toward me. Each shot slowed it momentarily but didn't stop it. When the shotgun clicked empty, I drew the pistol, firing until that too was spent. It stood just feet away now, its body riddled with wounds that were already healing, closing like mouths, swallowing the damage I'd inflicted. "Your weapons cannot harm me," it said. "Not permanently." "Then let's try fire," I replied, grabbing a flare gun from my pack. I fired directly at its chest. The flare embedded itself in the creature's torso, igniting the fluid that leaked from its wounds. Flames spread rapidly across its body. It screamed, a sound like nothing I'd ever heard, like nothing that should exist in this world. Not pain, but rage, frustration. It burned bright as a bonfire, thrashing, its form melting and reforming repeatedly as if struggling to maintain cohesion. I seized my opportunity, dousing it with gasoline, throwing a lit flare into the conflagration. The fire roared higher, the creature's screams intensifying until they seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the air, the ground, the lake itself. Then, abruptly, silence. The burning figure collapsed, its form dissolving into the sand like candle wax. I approached cautiously, weapon ready, searching for any sign of movement among the flames. Nothing remained except a dark stain in the sand and something small and white gleaming in the firelight, a single antler tine, untouched by the flames. I started to reach for it, then stopped myself. A trophy, perhaps, but also a potential link to the creature, a way for it to find me again. I used a stick to push it into the fire instead, watching as it blackened and cracked in the heat. Dawn broke over the mountains, sunlight touching the lake's surface. Birds began to sing in the forest around me. The oppressive silence that had followed the creature was gone, replaced by the normal sounds of wilderness morning. Had I won? Had I destroyed it, or merely damaged its current form? The historical accounts suggested it would return eventually, as it always had. But perhaps I'd bought time, for myself, for others who ventured into these woods. I gathered my remaining gear, exhaustion settling into my bones as adrenaline faded. One thing was certain, I couldn't stay in Nahimana Forest. Whatever connection had formed between me and the creature, whatever game we'd played, it would continue if I remained. As I turned to leave, to hike back to the ranger station and tender my resignation, I caught movement at the edge of the trees, a deer watching me, a normal deer with normal eyes showing normal fear of humans. It bounded away into the underbrush when I took a step toward it. Just a deer. Just nature reclaiming its proper place. I began the long walk back, each step carrying me further from Blackwater Lake and the horrors I'd encountered there. I didn't look back, didn't need to. I knew the lake would remain, beautiful and serene on its surface, concealing ancient hunger in its depths. Some secrets I realized. The forest keeps for itself. 6 months have passed since I left Nahimana Forest. I relocated to Arizona, took a position at a national monument where the landscape is open and arid, where trees are sparse and nothing can approach unseen. My colleagues attribute my hypervigilance to PTSD from whatever happened in Montana, a story I've never fully shared. The official report on the missing campers remains open, classified as a cold case. Search efforts were abandoned after 3 weeks. Their families still call occasionally, seeking updates, closure, answers I cannot give. I dream of Blackwater Lake almost nightly, its perfect stillness, the creature emerging from its depths. In some dreams, I defeat it as I did that morning. In others, I fail, joining the voices trapped within its impossible mouth. I wake from these nightmares drenched in sweat, reaching for weapons no longer kept by my bedside. Therapy helps, somewhat. I've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, prescribed medications that dull the worst of the anxiety. My therapist believes I experienced something traumatic in those woods, perhaps witnessed something my mind couldn't process. She suggests my memories have been altered, reshaped into something my psyche could better handle. Perhaps she's right. Perhaps what I remember never happened as I recall it. Perhaps there was a more mundane explanation for everything. A human predator stalking the woods. My own fear and isolation creating monsters where none existed. I almost believe it sometimes. Almost convince myself. Then the letters began arriving. No return address, postmarked from different small towns across Montana. Inside each envelope, a single page containing a single sentence, written in what looks like dried blood. The hunt continues. I burned the first letter, convinced it was my imagination, stress-triggering hallucinations. The second letter I reported to local police, who documented it as potential harassment, but could do little without more information. The third contained not just words but a small object wrapped in waxed paper, a human tooth, worn and yellowed with age, just like the one left on my hospital pillow. After the fifth letter, I stopped opening them. They arrive monthly, regular as clockwork. I store them unopened in a metal box in my closet, unable to destroy them but unwilling to confront their contents. 2 weeks ago, something changed. A new ranger at Nahimana Forest, someone who took my position after I left, disappeared while patrolling near Blackwater Lake. The authorities contacted me seeking insights given my familiarity with the area. I told them what I could, warned them about the lake, about the ravine, about the circular clearing, without mentioning what I'd encountered there. They found his body 3 days later, unlike the others who had vanished without trace. The official cause of death was listed as animal attack, though the autopsy report noted inconsistencies. wounds that matched no known predator, patterns of injury that suggested deliberation rather than predatory behavior. Most disturbing was what they didn't find: his skin, removed with surgical precision from his entire body. I requested copies of the crime scene photos through former colleagues. What the official report failed to mention was the state of the ranger's face, not mutilated or damaged, but frozen in an expression of absolute terror, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. He had seen what killed him, had known what was happening, had experienced exactly what the creature had promised me: the hunt. Last night I dreamed of Nahimana again, but differently. I stood at the edge of Blackwater Lake beneath a full moon, watching the still water. From its depths emerged not the creature but the missing campers, the lost hikers and hunters, the surveyor, all those who had vanished over decades. They walked from the water onto the shore, their skin pale and tight, their movements wrong in that now familiar way. Among them walked the new ranger, his flayed body glistening in the moonlight, his face still locked in that expression of terror. They surrounded me, these hollow people, these empty vessels. They spoke with one voice, that grinding stone-on-stone voice I remembered too well. "You escaped the hunt," they said, "the first in generations. But the hunt never truly ends." I woke gasping, heart racing, the dream so vivid I could smell the forest, feel the night air on my skin. As consciousness fully returned, I became aware of something wrong in my bedroom, a scent out of place in the Arizona desert. Pine, water, rot, copper. On my bedside table sat a small leather pouch tied with sinew, identical to the one I'd found hanging from my cabin porch months earlier. With trembling hands, I reached for it, already knowing what I would find inside: teeth, human teeth. But among them this time, something new. A small carved figure made of bone, shaped like a man running. A hunter, or prey. I dropped the pouch, scrambling from bed, turning on every light in my apartment. Nothing lurked in corners or closets. The doors remained locked, windows secured. No sign of forced entry, no indication of how the pouch had appeared by my bed. As dawn broke, I sat surrounded by light, weapons close at hand, the leather pouch on the coffee table before me. A decision formed, crystallizing from fear and resignation and a strange sense of inevitability. I have to go back to Nahimana Forest, back to Blackwater Lake. Not to fight this time. I tried that and won only temporary reprieve. Not to run. Distance offers no protection, as I've learned through months of letters and now this delivery to my bedside. I need to understand, to communicate, to negotiate, if such a thing is possible with a creature so ancient and alien. Why me? Why was I allowed to escape when others weren't? What does it want from me now? I leave tomorrow. Have already requested leave from my current position. I've made arrangements, left instructions with my attorney in case I don't return. This account, these words, will serve as record and warning should I join the voices in the creature's mouth, should I become another disappearance in a long history of vanishings. The hunt continues as the letters promised. But this time, I'm not running from the hunter. I'm returning to face it, to end this game one way or another. If you're reading this and I haven't returned, stay away from Nahimana Forest. Stay away from Blackwater Lake. Some places belong to older things than us. Some territories should remain unchallenged. And if you're in those woods and the silence falls, if you feel watched by eyes you cannot see, if you hear footsteps that move wrong, or voices that sound almost but not quite human, run. Run far, run fast. The skin changer hunts beneath the ancient pines, and it is always, always hungry.